Chapter 449. Ha. Luo Su's expression changed as he continued with a look of disdain. You were still in school when I was leading the army. Now all the construction projects in the northern frontier are going on at the same time. Here, being a civilian makes more money than being a soldier, and it's also a lot safer. And yet, Lord Dragon King forbade us from forcibly conscripting soldiers. How are you going to defend the northern frontier if you lose the people you have? Are you going to count on those monsters? If this is an enemy's camp, then you're right. Li Zhong looked at Luo Su and shook his head gently, saying in a deep voice, but this is Taicang. Other than the rebellious clans, there are also millions of civilians. I don't know if the defense line built by the clans at the northern frontier will collapse if you continue to bombard it, but the image of the northern frontier lord's residence as a benevolent ruler will definitely crumble. Luo Su waved his hand in disgust and walked toward the camp. Although he did not have any bad feelings toward Li Zhong, as the former commander of the garrison army in mountain-blocking city, he knew very well that all the mercy he showed during the war would only bring pain to himself. Back when they were fighting against the demon beasts, they had to give up countless of their fellow soldiers and brothers in order to stabilize the front line. But now they were fighting against a group of beasts in human skin. Why should they be so restrained? If it were not for the fact that the siege weapons in the northern frontier were all under the control of the northern frontier lord's residence, and that no one was allowed to use them without the letter and seal of the northern frontier lord, Luo Su felt that he would have taken Taicang City a long time ago. There must be a way. There must be a way. Li Zhong looked at Luo Su's back as he walked further and further away. He slowly closed his eyes and began to recall the topographic map of the entire Taicang City. While he directly rejected Luo Su's idea of using siege weapons to bombard Taicang City, that did not mean that he was going to grit his teeth and let his men build a path into the city with blood and flesh. Li Zhong opened his eyes all of a sudden after a while and bellowed, "All cultivators above level 8 of the airborne realm are to report to me right now. We will begin attacking the enemy forces in Taicang City in an hour." As soon as Li Zhong finished speaking, the two guards beside him quickly ran off. One of them ran towards the flag officer of the Royal Guards, while the other ran towards the camp that the Imperial Guards and the Northern Battlefront Army had set up beforehand. An hour later, one by one the soldiers who had changed into black night clothes, with short swords and crossbows on their waists, walked out of the camp in a single file. Their Zhen Qi circulated in their bodies, and within a few moments, they had already approached Taicang City. However, the private soldiers of the clans who were ready to go were surprised to find that those men in black, who were at least at level 8 of the airborne realm, were not there to clear the way for the rest of the troops. They jumped onto the roofs of the houses as soon as they entered Taicang City. The private soldiers of the clans who were hiding in the houses on both sides of the street were dumbfounded right away. There was no way they were going to poke the roofs with their weapons. If the roofs were to collapse, wouldn't they be the ones to suffer? However, the clans were not all good-for-nothings. Seeing that someone had bypassed the street battlefield that they had prepared, they immediately pulled the reserve troops up and began to distribute arrows to shoot at those men in black, who did not play by the rules. However, they did not get much out of it. After all, the enemy was a cultivator at the late stage of the airborne realm. Be it in terms of strength or speed, those mortal evolution state soldiers were no match for them. After a round of arrow rain, they did not get anything out of it other than causing some scratches to the few men in black at the front. On the other hand, the men in black took out their crossbows and fired at them in unison, taking out 700 to 800 lives in the blink of an eye. Idiots, find cover and reload. Keep shooting. You must. An aristocratic family's patriarch angrily commanded his family's private army, but before he could finish speaking, a whistling crossbow arrow fiercely nailed into his forehead. For a moment, all the clan lords were silent out of fear. They stared at the black-robed men on the rooftops with burning eyes. However, no one dared to jump out and command their troops. They could only tacitly agree that they would follow the original plan. After all, that crossbow arrow wasn't a stray arrow. It was aimed at their command point. A clan leader wearing a gray robe stood behind a wall and said loudly, "I know what they are going to do. The battlefield now is the street battle that we have chosen. With the quality of the Northern Frontier's army, although they can win against us in a street battle, they definitely won't be willing to suffer such a loss. These men in black are going to mobilize our army and make us fight them in open terrain." A burly patriarch of an aristocratic family spat on the ground and said coldly, "F***ck your mother's fart. I will stay here and not move. See if their main force can come in. Do you think they can fool us with this kind of trick? I'm afraid you have no choice but to move even if you don't want to." An old man who looked to be in his 60s or 70s sighed. Look at the movements of these men in black. Where do you think they are going? The granary, the burly clan leader exclaimed. His face suddenly became gloomy. Because of the special geography of the northern frontier, it was not only the Jianghu dynasty that fought against the evil beasts, but also these aristocratic families. After all, the aristocratic families in the northern frontier who mainly relied on the materials of the evil beasts to make a living were definitely more hated by the evil beasts than the castellan's mansion. Therefore, these aristocratic families were not unfamiliar with leading troops to battle. Otherwise, they would not have been able to see through Li Zhong's intentions so quickly. After all, the reason why Taicang City dared to turn their camp into a turtle shell and drag the Northern Region Lord's Palace's army into a street fight was because they had Taicang City's granary in their hands. The Northern Region Lord's Palace could surround Pingwang and Anmin City without attacking to minimize their losses. However, Taicang City was determined to win because most of the Northern Region's food was stored in Taicang City. The people who were trapped in Taicang City weren't afraid of running out of food. However, if the Northern Region Lord's Palace didn't have any food to eat, it would be a disaster. As the hope of the entire Northern Region, although Taicang Granary was built in the Eastern City District, it was surrounded by empty land for tens of thousands of miles. Only near the granary were there 100 or so houses for the guards on duty to guard the granary. Moreover, they were all one-story houses with a small area. Standing at the door, one could see what these houses were like. Although such a place was inside the city, it was more than enough to be used as a battlefield. Once in such an open place, how could these mortal evolution state aristocratic families' private soldiers fight against the Northern Frontier Army? Chapter 450. Why don't we invite those clans over? A clan lord with a curly beard looked around and asked with a grim look on his face. To put it bluntly, the aristocratic families gathered in the outer city were almost the weakest in the entire northern region. They were placed there to serve as cannon fodder and stop the regular army of the Lord of the Northern Region. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been helpless against a group of men in black who were at the advanced stage of the airborne realm. They had no choice but to cover their heads and hide behind cover. I don't think they have the time. The clan lord in a gray robe shook his head gently and sighed. That Li Zhong or whatever has set up a government office in name only, and the manpower of the local government has increased by more than 3 times. Those clans have a hard time suppressing the local government, the Association of the Demon Emperor, and the embroidered uniform guards. Even if we go to them, we might not be able to get them to do anything. Otherwise what? The burly clan lord smirked and said coldly, "You don't want us to do it ourselves, do you?" The clan lord in a gray robe rolled his eyes twice and sneered. "I think you're not very smart, but you're not stupid either. Think about it, if the clans of the northern frontier and the northern frontier were to fight, who would have a better chance of winning? This is especially true for all of you here. None of you are considered top-notch figures among the clans of the northern frontier. Otherwise, you wouldn't have been reduced to being cannon fodder with me. Although I have the name of a clan, I only have a few dozen acres of land under my name, and the annual harvest I get is not even as good as what I get when I go on a trip to the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce with the big caravans. Now those clans can't take this lying down. They don't want the northern frontier to take their thousands of acres of land, so they encourage us to rebel and then leave us here to die. This is not right." As soon as he finished speaking, the clan lords of the smaller clans began to whisper. As the old saying goes, the ass decides the head. If those present were all clan heads of large aristocratic families, they would consider that their farmlands could be used to raise private soldiers. In times of chaos, it was not impossible for them to encircle a piece of land and wait for the imperial court to enlist them. However, those present today were almost all clan heads of small aristocratic families who were used as cannon fodder by large aristocratic families. The income they earned from farmlands was only enough to feed a family of 100 people. They could not afford to raise a large-scale private army, not to mention encircling a piece of land during the chaos. Therefore, the reason why the aristocratic families were rebelling was not attractive to them at all. The reason why they were here was because they were threatened by the aristocratic families. Otherwise, who would be willing to be cannon fodder? That may be the case, but do you have any other ideas? The burly family head sneered and said in a strange tone, "We are rebelling right now. Have you ever seen a king who can tolerate his subordinates rebelling before surrendering?" Humans were strange creatures. There were times when they were very assertive and would not listen to anyone's advice. But there were also times when they did not have their own opinions at all. They were so easily swayed that they would believe whatever others said. Those present were all clan heads of the small family. When they heard the gray-robed family head's words, they felt that they did not want to rebel. Wasn't it not worth it to give up their lives for the sake of the aristocratic families? But when they heard the burly family head's words, they felt that the possibility of them surrendering was not high. After all, Lei Fan and Hu Yin were considered to be the old generals by the Black Jiao's side. Wasn't it because they had violated these taboos and were kicked out just like that? They were now standing on the side of the rebels. Seeing that they could not defeat the northern frontier prince's mansion, they were going to surrender. Even if Li Zhong was willing to take them under his command now when the trouble at hand was settled, would Li Zhong still have a reason to let them go? If all of you were to go out and surrender just like that, you will not be able to escape death. But now is such a good opportunity. If you can release the power of the various government offices and assist the regular army outside the city to take down Taicang, it will be a great merit. If we have such merit in our hands, even if Li Zhong wants our lives, he will have to first ask for Lord Dragon King's permission. The gray-robed family head's lips curled up slightly and he said with a cold smile, Lord Dragon King has no intention of completely annihilating us aristocratic families. If we are all exterminated, who is going to help the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce to do business in the south? It is all those aristocratic families who are not willing to let Lord Dragon King take away their land, and that is why they have joined forces to create such a ruckus. Instead, they have put us in a difficult position. Among the aristocratic families in the northern frontier, there were the Qiao family who clenched their teeth and stuck with Lin Yuan. There were also the large aristocratic families who clenched their teeth and wanted to fight to the death with the northern frontier prince's mansion. But there were not many family heads who had the courage to bet the lives of their entire family on this battle. Most of them were like this gray-robed family head, planning to stay for a while and see the situation before deciding which side to stand on. This method seemed to have a high chance of success. At least they could bet their chips on the winner. But everyone knew that once they were in this quagmire, it would be difficult to get out. If they did not have enough merit and sincerity, even if they bet correctly, they would be punished by Li Zhong one by one. Because if they put themselves in his shoes, if they were sitting on the throne of the northern frontier prince, they would not want the aristocratic families to once again become a big threat to the prince's mansion in the northern frontier. Any existence that did not wholeheartedly submit to them had to be eliminated as soon as possible. You tell us first, what should we do? If your plan is good, I can bet with you. If we bet correctly this time, the good days that belong to us in the northern frontier will arrive. The burly family head licked his lips. It was obvious that the gray-robed family head's suggestion was extremely tempting to him. The gray-robed family head crossed his arms in front of his chest. With an unfathomable smile on his face, he said, First of all, we will let these black-robed men go directly to the granary. Then we will split into two groups. One group will go outside and beg for surrender. At the same time, we will explain our intentions and let them send some experts to infiltrate into our group. After that, we will go to the various government offices and say that the northern frontier prince's mansion has gathered experts and we are unable to stop them. They are already heading in the direction of the granary. When the time comes, before the gray-robed family head could finish his words, the bearded family head interrupted him and asked, It's easy for you to say. Don't you know what the big aristocratic families are like? They are already unable to suppress the power of the various government offices in Taicang City. Originally, they planned to rely on us to delay the army of the northern frontier prince's mansion for a period of time so that they can gradually eat away at the people in the government offices. Good fellow, you just accepted the battle and directly reported that you are unable to defeat them. Do you think they will let us go? Chapter 451. Why are you so noisy? Don't tell me you're scared? The gray-robed family master coldly sized up the curled-bearded family master and sneered, Now that the situation is like this, if we don't want to be cannon fodder, we must hug the thighs of the northern frontier Wangfu. If we want to hug the thighs of the northern frontier Wangfu, the only way is to completely offend the northern frontier aristocratic families. For someone like you who doesn't do anything and just wants to watch them fight, you can just wait to be settled. Speaking up to this point, the gray-robed family master pointed at the surrounding family masters and said with a cold face, I don't have any other intentions. I just want to find a way out for my brothers and instantly take revenge on those aristocratic families who used us as cannon fodder. If you guys aren't willing, fine. Let's have a fight first so that we won't drag anyone down. As his voice fell, the surrounding area was so silent that a pin drop could be heard. After all, even though they were members of the northern frontier aristocratic families, they were at the lowest level. Not to mention that the northern frontier Wangfu could directly crush the so-called northern frontier aristocratic families in terms of strength. Even if both sides were evenly matched, they still hoped that the Wangfu would win. After all, as long as Lin Yuan existed in the northern frontier, they would be able to reap huge benefits from the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce. And if the aristocratic families controlled the northern frontier, it would only cause these small and medium-sized aristocratic families to gradually fall apart. Furthermore, at this point in time, even if there were really stubborn people who thought that this matter was related to the survival of the northern frontier aristocratic families, they would have to reconsider. No one was willing to die, and there weren't many people who were noble enough to be willing to die for others. Whoever interrupts again, I'll twist his neck off. The burly family master swept a glance at the surrounding people who were silent like cicadas in winter. He smiled at the gray-robed family master and said, "Brother, I'll do whatever you say. You didn't finish your words just now. What do you want us to do after we report this to the Yamen?" The gray-robed family's lord coldly snorted. A cold light flickered in his eyes as he indifferently said, "They'll send some of their experts to the front line with us after we've delivered the message. They'll try to snipe those black-robed men's steps. Those who've gone to the Yamen are bound to have a quarrel with them. Now is the time when they need people. They won't kill anyone. However, they'll certainly say some unpleasant words. So take advantage of this gap. Those who've gone out to beg for surrender must hurry up and inform the other side of my plan." 15 minutes later. After receiving the message from his subordinate, Li Zhong stroked his chin and sneered. He had made a special trip to suppress the northern frontier aristocratic families. He didn't expect that the aristocratic families would have internal strife even before the official start. He just wanted to lead people to the granary to change the terrain to a more open battlefield suitable for them to fight. Let Luo Su send some embroidered uniform guards who are good at hiding their breath to go back with them. Also, let those people in front stop the attack, lest those people come out and think that the family masters of those small aristocratic families are deceiving them. But it's okay to go easy on them, but too much will seem fake. Let them know what to do. Li Zhong sat in the commander's tent and slowly read out his order. Luo Su nodded repeatedly as if he had thought of something. Li Zhong waved his hand and dismissed the messenger in front of him. Only then did his eyes fall on Luo Su, waiting for him to continue. "I always thought that although the Dragon King's methods were extraordinary compared to the real heroes, he was still a little lacking. Because every time the Dragon King's chess piece was placed, he was always ready to use force to get the situation back on track when it was out of his control. But today, before we even entered Taicang City, the big aristocratic families and the small aristocratic families were forced into conflict because of us. Only now did I understand why the Dragon King wanted me to pay attention to these 3 cities. Almost all the big aristocratic families have countless fertile fields. For the sake of their family's future, it's normal for them to fall out with us. But the small aristocratic families obviously don't have such benefits. They will only stand on the opposite side of us, purely under the coercion of the big aristocratic families. If they can gain the upper hand, it's fine. But once they are forced into a desperate situation, their past dirty deeds will be exposed. Of course, the aristocratic families have offended the Dragon King's reverse scale. But at this point, they still know to atone for their sins by using the heads of the big aristocratic families in exchange for their own survival. Whether it's these quick-witted talents or the small but prosperous families behind them, for us, it's all beneficial." Luo Su's eyes narrowed slightly and he smiled. "More importantly, keeping these small aristocratic families for our use is tantamount to setting an example for the small aristocratic families outside. If the aristocratic families outside have a conflict with us, after this chaos, we only need to see how carefree and comfortable these small aristocratic families in the northern frontier are, and they won't stand on the wrong side again." "Your flattery is not bad. It's a pity that the Dragon King isn't here." Li Zhong choked on Luo Su's words and then said indifferently, "This is a job that can lead to death. As the commander-in-chief of the Embroidered Uniform Guard, don't you plan to say a few words to the selected Embroidered Uniform Guard?" Luo Su spread out his hands indifferently and said indifferently, "What's there to say? It's not like you don't know the Embroidered Uniform Guard's initial criteria for recruiting spies. The most basic point is that you can't take your life seriously. You have to have the ability to lie flat on the ground and not get up even if the wheels of a speeding carriage are a centimeter away from your head. Only then can you be selected to serve in the Embroidered Uniform Guard." This. Li Zhong looked at Luo Su with a blank face. He didn't expect that the first batch of people recruited by the embroidered uniform guard would all be lunatics who didn't take their lives seriously. Yes, although these people usually looked normal, if a person could disregard life and death and still roll around in the world of mortals for fame and fortune, then that person was 100% a lunatic. Luo Su drank the tea in his cup in one gulp and said with a smile, "It's just a test of courage. You haven't seen the training courses of the embroidered uniform guard. If a normal person doesn't have this kind of courage, after half a month of training, they'll either become a lunatic or a fool. What's more, the embroidered uniform guard's work isn't clean. Whatever the higher-ups want, we have to ask. Even the slightest bit won't do. When faced with those stubborn people, we can only use torture. Tell me, if a person doesn't take his own life seriously, would he take the lives of others seriously?" Li Zhong subconsciously shivered. Although he knew that Luo Su was referring to the first generation of the embroidered uniform guard, with such a group of perverted seniors, he could already see a corner of how difficult the days of the youths who would fill in the positions of the embroidered uniform guard would be. Chapter 452. D***, are you all F*** useless? A family leader whose face was flushed red grabbed the collar of the gray-robed family leader and said coldly, "We all left our private soldiers stationed in the outer city, and we didn't let you idiots personally go into battle. You can't even command the battle well? Even if you use your life, can't you stop those black-clothed people for a while?" The gray-robed family leader's face was smeared with mud, and he looked battered and exhausted. He smiled bitterly and said, "Boss Lin, it's not that we didn't try our best. Thousands of black-clothed people came out together, and all of them were at the advanced stage of the airborne realm. Not to mention those private soldiers who were used as cannon fodder. Even if we went up personally, we wouldn't be able to withstand a round of their charge." The original Northern Frontier private soldiers were not much different from the regular army because at that time, whether it was the City Lord's office or the Northern Frontier families, they did not have much money and food to feed the army. However, after Lin Yuan established the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce, the money and food invested in the construction of the regular army was not on the same level as the aristocratic families. In addition to a large number of spiritual items, after Li Zhong and Luo Su joined forces, about 150,000 troops were almost all at the airborne realm. Even if they were at the advanced stage of the airborne realm and above, they had directly gathered tens of thousands of people. On the other hand, the quality of the family's private soldiers was somewhat unsightly. Even airborne realm warriors were able to stand on equal footing with these small clans, let alone late-stage airborne realm warriors. Furthermore, all of them were in the ranks of the main clans, which meant that they were not people that these small clan leaders could command. However, the combat prowess of both sides was there for all to see. Airborne realm warriors were able to hover in the air for a short period of time, and they could even use the air to jump. While they were traveling on the roof, the mortal evolution warriors below had to think of ways to build ladders to climb up. By the time they made it up, those people on the roof were nowhere to be seen. Even if they were able to catch the enemy's follow-up forces, it was hard to say whether they were lucky or unlucky. After all, they were fighting on a narrow roof, and they also had to consider the roof's load-bearing capacity. Usually, it would be 10 or so mortal evolution states fighting 7 or 8 airborne states. In comparison, they had no chance of winning at all. Of course, although the gray-robed clan leader knew that the enemy had at least 8,000 if not 10,000 late-stage airborne realm cultivators, when he went to the Yamen to ask for help, he could only say a number that was not too exaggerated. Otherwise, he would have directly said that there were 10,000 late-stage airborne realm cultivators. At that time, the enemy would not think about how to continue to consolidate the defense line, but would instead think about running for their lives. Again, the aristocratic family's private soldiers could fight in the streets, and they could also use the street battles to buy enough time for the northern frontier to fall into chaos, or wait for the other two backup plans to take effect. But if they were asked to gather their men and horses to fight against the northern frontier's regular army, they obviously didn't have the guts to do so. Thousands of advanced airborne realm cultivators? Only then did the complexion of the clan's master, whose face was flushed red, clear up a little. He loosened the collar of the clan's master and said in a deep voice, "Then what's the meaning of you coming here? Don't tell me that you're going to ask me to send people to support you. It took a lot of effort for me to be able to suppress these lunatics in the Yamen. If I were to send more people away, the entire line of defense might collapse." They naturally knew how the battle of the cannon fodder outside was. Not to mention thousands of advanced airborne realm cultivators, even if there were 200 or 300 of them, they could easily tear their line of defense. Now, the men in black outside had yet to rush in, which was enough to prove that the private soldiers in front were already using their lives to delay the enemy's new advance. Big Brother Lin, I'm not worrying for nothing. These thousands of men in black can be strong, but they can also be weak. If they were to enter the city, they would go straight to the stronghold of the Association of the Demon Emperor or the various yamens. I'm sure I have nothing to worry about because the elites of the various clan leaders are gathered here. Even if they were to rush in, they would only end up with their heads bleeding. There's no way they could threaten us at all. At this point, the gray-robed clan's master took a deep breath and pointed in the direction of the eastern city. He asked, "But what if they don't care about the lives of these people in the city and go straight to the granary?" At this time, Big Brother Lin was slightly stunned. He immediately shook his head decisively and cursed, "T, there are still troops under their command in the city. If they were to rush in, it should be a small force. The main force will still be blocked by the streets. If those little rats that rush in want to do something, they must first liberate these people in the city. If they don't come to save people, it can only mean that there's a traitor among us." At this point, Big Brother Lin reached out and patted the gray-robed clan's master on the shoulder. He sneered and said, "Don't you think so?" The gray-robed clan's master sighed and said in a low voice, "Big Brother Lin, what do you think we're doing? Are we children playing house? We're rebelling. If you're not careful, you can lose your head. How can you be so careless? Do you know who's leading the troops outside the city? One is Li Zhong, who has single-handedly schemed against my aristocratic family, and the other is Luo Su, who has completely exposed the epidemic food plan. With these two fiends together, do you think that we will not become traitors? Do you think there is a way to survive?" Big Brother Lin deliberated for a moment and didn't continue to be entangled in the topic of traitors. The gray-robed clan's master shook his head again and sighed, "I originally thought that Hu Yin had suffered a big loss at Li Zhong's hands, which caused our clan to lose the hearts of the people. You arrogant clan's masters would sound the alarm for yourselves and treat Li Zhong as a real opponent. But now, it seems that you haven't learned your lesson and still don't treat Li Zhong seriously, right?" Speaking up to hear, he raised his hand and pointed in the direction of the granary and said in a low voice, "The food we're eating now is all transferred from the granary. Although the surrounding clans didn't participate in the operation, they've sent all their private armies over. With so many people eating, how many days does Big Brother Lin think your family's private storehouse can last them?" Big Brother Lin silently calculated for a moment. His eyes revealed a touch of panic and said in a low voice, "If something happens to the granary, our food can only last for 7 days. In terms of time, we're much more urgent than the northern frontier prince's mansion." The gray-robed clan's master nodded heavily and said bitterly, "Now Li Zhong obviously wants to send people to occupy the granary first. Big Brother, if you don't give people here, you won't give people in other places either. If the outer defense line can't hold, I can only let them pass. The battlefield will change from the streets and alleys that we've carefully selected to the tens of thousands of miles of open space near the granary. Big Brother, how many people do you think we'll have left after one round of assault?" At this point, even if Big Brother Lin has a heart of stone, he has to consider whether he can keep his head. Chapter 453. 30,000 miles away from Taicang City, on the top of a mountain. Ding Zai was wearing a sapphire blue robe with a wide belt with red spider patterns around his waist. His long hair hung down to his waist. Although Ding Zai didn't look much different from before in terms of facial features, his temperament was completely different. It was as if he was a different person. The aura around him flowed with the faint sound of wind and thunder. "It seems that our demon emperor is sure to win." Ding Zai looked at the coiled-up black Jiao in front of him. A faint smile appeared on his face as he took the initiative to break the silence. Lin Yuan slowly turned his head. There was no color in his different-colored eyes. He said indifferently, "If there is no problem on your side, this king won't lose. With such a huge gap, the only winning hand for the northern frontier clans is Kong Lezen. Other than that, any other path is a dead end. Otherwise, I can continue to suppress the northern frontier. Why should I give up this stage for them to fight?" Ding Zai laughed dryly and said in a deep voice, "Unfortunately, Lord Demon Emperor overestimated himself, and similarly overestimated me. I came all the way to the Upper Deer Association and didn't even meet a decent expert." Whoosh. With a sharp sound of wind breaking, Lin Yuan, who was coiled up in front of Ding Zai, suddenly appeared in front of him. The two looked at each other for a while. Lin Yuan slowly opened his mouth and sneered, "Is your Upper Deer Association still playing tricks? If you can't do what I ask, you will definitely not return to the northern frontier to die." As the sound of his voice faded, an incomparably majestic aura gushed out from his body. The might that belonged to the dragon race was like a mountain that could suppress the world, ruthlessly crushing down on Ding Zai. Under the pressure of Lin Yuan's terrifying aura, Ding Zai took a few steps back. He took a deep breath and said with a red face, "Since Demon Emperor knows about the Heaven Gate, then you should know that for us, any combat power is very precious. The higher-ups feel that you have the potential to become one of them in the future, so they are willing to make peace for you. However, Kong Lezen is now one of those people. They naturally won't send experts to kill Kong Lezen for you." As the sound of his voice faded, Lin Yuan's dragon might still didn't have the slightest intention of restraining it. It pressed down on Ding Zai's body inch by inch as if wanting to crush him into meat paste. "Kong Lezen will soon withdraw from the northern frontier. This is what you should have thought of before we set off." Ding Zai's face was flushed red, his chest was heaving up and down violently, but the amount of oxygen he could breathe in was very little. Only now did he realize that this black Jiao was unbelievably strong. Beast kings at the Mountain Lord level weren't rare, but Ding Zai had never seen a beast king at the Mountain Lord level who could give him such a strong sense of pressure like Lin Yuan. "Yes, I did think of it. So, from the beginning, I didn't count on your upper deer association." Lin Yuan's suppression on Ding Zai loosened slightly. A faint smile flashed across his different-colored eyes as he continued, "I just want you and Kong Lezen to think that I have placed my hopes on your upper deer association." What did you do? Lunatic." Ding Zai looked at Lin Yuan with a dumbfounded expression. His face even started to distort. Lin Yuan condescendingly looked at Ding Zai, whose face was distorted, and said word by word, "I just want to tell all of you from today onwards, whoever stretches their claws towards me, I will dare to chop off their claws. What happened to the Fire Kirin back then, will be what happened to Kong Lezen today." Kong Lezen was the guardian of the Heaven Gate. No matter what position he had among those top bosses, he was extremely rare in this circle where combat strength was scarce. If Lin Yuan wanted to resolve this matter through peaceful diplomacy, then the best result would be for him to cause a storm in the northern frontier and almost overturn the entire northern frontier. Then he would leave as if nothing had happened. If Kong Lezen could do this today, it would be the same if someone else came tomorrow. At least before Lin Yuan grew to their level, there would not be the slightest change. As long as there was a conflict between the two sides, the one who would suffer in the end would definitely be Lin Yuan. And to put it bluntly, the Sky Martial continent could be said to be extremely afraid of the things on the other side of the Heaven Gate. They were strictly guarding it and were not willing to let anything from outside the Heaven Gate enter the Sky Martial continent. This kind of abnormal defense had been maintained since ancient times until now. Even in the current cultivation world, the Void Realm was already the ceiling. To put it nicely, it was called being cautious. To put it bluntly, these people were just scared by some bad things on the other side. But they had completely forgotten that the cultivation techniques they were practicing today also came from the other side of the Heaven Gate. Lin Yuan did not have any fear of the other side of the Heaven Gate. Whether it was a psychological effect or not, or what he had seen and heard after coming to this world, Lin Yuan was at least 60% sure that even if the other side of the Heaven Gate was not the world he was familiar with, it should be a similar world. As long as he could find the way, sooner or later he would be able to return to his original world and put down all the blood feud. "You can't do that." Ding Zai looked at Lin Yuan with a twisted face and growled, "I don't care what method you use, but you have to know that Kong Lezen is a member of the Heaven Gate's guardian. He is an indispensable fighting force of our Sky Martial continent. If you kill him, no one will be able to save you, this daring demonic beast." Lin Yuan raised his eyelids slightly and said casually, "Since I have the ability to kill Kong Lezen, I have the ability to kill others. Do you think those almighty experts above Kong Lezen are the same as him and can walk away casually? Or is it that they can send several existences on the level of Kong Lezen at once?" Ding Zai was silent. Obviously he did not know how to refute Lin Yuan's words. A cold light flashed in Lin Yuan's eyes and he sneered, "All your madness now is telling me that the Sky Martial continent cannot afford the loss of one Kong Lezen, but I can tell you that today Kong Lezen will definitely die. After he dies, no one will touch me, and there will be people rushing to curry favor with me. Because in the future, this king is destined to go to the Heaven Gate, and is destined to stand at a higher place than Kong Lezen. With one Kong Lezen dead, only the four alliance behind him will feel a little heartache. You talk to this king about the big picture, and this king will also talk to you about the big picture. How about it?" Chapter 454. Lin Yuan, tell me what you want. As long as you let go of Kong Lezin, we, the Upper Deer Association, will do our best to satisfy you. Ding Zai swallowed a mouthful of saliva and shook his head as if he had accepted his fate. He said bitterly, the higher-ups told me that we must bring honored one Kong Lu back to Heaven's Gate safely because there are strange movements at Heaven's Gate again. This time no one knows what will appear. Any battle power is precious to us. He can't die here, he really can't. There were no small matters in Heaven's Gate. Even a little bit of gossip was enough to shake the entire Jianghu continent. Moreover, there were indeed strange movements at Heaven's Gate this time. According to past experience, Heaven's Gate was likely to open again. No one could say for sure what would come out of Heaven's Gate this time and what its attitude would be towards them. If someone else was standing here, Ding Zai might sneer at them for overestimating themselves. Although Kong Lezin was not a top figure, he was not an existence that any Tom, Dick and Harry could deal with. However, the person who threatened him was Lin Yuan, an existence that was linked to miracles since his birth. In a year and a half, he had turned from a small black snake into the current Black Jiao in the north. His speed of advancement was even more terrifying than Yang Qinglin, who had used a secret technique to reincarnate. Since his birth, he had won every battle. Fighting enemies above his level was as easy as eating and drinking. Moreover, he had single-handedly turned the bitter cold northern frontier into the current paradise. Even people with discerning eyes could see that as long as the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce existed, the North would become the absolute core of the entire Jianghu dynasty in the future. In his eyes, the sects and aristocratic families that caused headaches to the royal families of the 7 great empires were like chickens and dogs that could be destroyed with a flip of his hand. He was clearly a demonic beast, but he had opened up a new territory and occupied the territory of humans. However, the 7 great empires had pinched their noses and accepted this matter. The Jianghu dynasty had suppressed their displeasure and conferred Lin Yuan the title of a god in the northern frontier. Moreover, under Lin Yuan's influence, 3 successive kings of the northern frontier were changed. Even if some people thought that once the Jianghu dynasty regained its peace, Lin Yuan would be in trouble. But everyone knew that it was impossible. Unless the Jianghu dynasty was willing to give up the vast majority of its tax revenue and wanted to eliminate the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce after losing the Southern Maritime Trade, if it really came to that step, even if the Jianghu dynasty was very peaceful on the surface, in fact, it was only one step away from being destroyed. Therefore, the position of the northern frontier and Lin Yuan in the Jianghu dynasty in the future was absolutely unique. In other words, Lin Yuan had created too many miracles. Even he himself was a huge miracle. Upper Deer Association? It seems that you have never fulfilled the promise you made. The coldness in Lin Yuan's heterochromatic eyes turned and was replaced with ridicule and ridicule. He said in a deep voice, I asked you to bring an expert who can contend with Kong Lezin. In the end, you went out and came back to tell me that you wanted to take Kong Lezin away and this matter is over. Then I want to ask you, if it weren't for the quick reaction of my people, those infected food would have entered the warehouse of the northern frontier. Can you solve it? The construction of a series of projects in the northern frontier has been stalled. Can you solve it? Ding Zai reached out to touch the cold sweat on his nose and looked at Lin Yuan with trepidation. After a long while, Ding Zai sighed and said, You have to know, whether it is the northern frontier or me, our lives are not worth mentioning in the eyes of those above. Unless it is someone like you, who has the qualifications to become the guardian of the heavenly gate. Only then will they have some weight in their eyes. The rest are trivial matters or even not a matter. Speaking of this, Ding Zai raised his head and looked at the ridicule in Lin Yuan's eyes. He lowered his head again and said, You are right. In the big picture, even if you kill Kong Lezin, they will not take your life. Instead, they will give you a large amount of resources for your cultivation so that you can replace Kong Lezin's position as the guardian of the heavenly gate as soon as possible. But, Ding Zai paused again. Seeing Lin Yuan's contemplative look, he continued, They will make us, their lackeys, join forces to destroy the northern frontier. They will make all your efforts go to waste, and they will kill all the people who are on good terms with you. This is their punishment. You did not listen to their opinions and insisted on killing Kong Lezin. Speaking of this, Ding Zai carefully raised his head. Seeing Lin Yuan's eyes showing hesitation, he suppressed the joy in his heart. He cupped his hands in greeting to Lin Yuan and said in a deep voice, And we, whether in your eyes or in their eyes, are all ant-like existences not worth mentioning. The orders from above, we have to carry them out unconditionally. Are you threatening this king? Lin Yuan still maintained a condescending posture, but the dragon's might on his body was slowly withdrawn. Ding Zai shook his head and said respectfully, I don't dare. I just hope that you will think about it carefully. Is it more important to vent your anger, or to maintain the current situation and mind your own business with the people above? Lin Yuan pondered for a moment, then used his dragon tail to break the surrounding trees with some irritation. He roared, this is the first and last time this king will compromise with them. Take Kong Lezen and get out of the northern frontier as soon as possible. If there is a next time, this king will not give any of you any face. If anyone dares to reach out, this king will definitely chop off their hands. Yes. Thank you, Demon Emperor, for your mercy. Ding Zai respectfully put his head on the ground and replied with a big smile. For an existence like him, even if his combat strength burst out in the northern frontier, only Lin Yuan, Yan Xingqi, Yang Qinglin and Kong Lezen could surpass him. But after being cultivated by the Deer Association since childhood, Ding Zai had long forgotten what his own edge and dignity were. As long as he could achieve his goal, he was willing to do anything and pay any price. Even if the negotiation had reached this point, Ding Zai would still suspect that Lin Yuan was just bluffing and did not have a way to kill Kong Lezen. But he did not dare to gamble, nor did he dare to go against this temperamental Black Jiao, because the one who would suffer in the end would be him. Wait. Lin Yuan stopped Ding Zai, who was just about to get up. Seeing the latter immediately stop and obediently lie on the ground again, he nodded with satisfaction and said, this king let Kong Lezen go, but it is not without conditions. Since those guys behind you control this world, then, let's change the situation. Chapter 455. Let's not talk about the bargaining between Lin Yuan and Ding Zai. At the same time, in addition to the chaotic battle in Taizong City, no one noticed that a cavalry in bright red armor was like a torrent of steel, waving machetes and lances, rushing toward Shunning City under the cover of the night. They looked very aggressive, like beasts that had just been released from their cages. The most important thing was that these knights in red armor did not wear helmets, and their exposed hairstyles were indescribably strange. They were either bald here or there with braids there. Some of them had braids all over their heads and some of them were bald. They didn't look like a proper army. Instead, they looked like a group of armored bandits. The smell of blood could be smelled from their bodies even from far away. In a flash, the leading knight in red armor suddenly pulled the reins and raised his right hand to make a gesture. The whole troop suddenly stopped as if time had stopped. The knights on the horses all silently pulled out their machetes and stared at the darkness in front of them. In the darkness, there stood a silent army. The two sides were hundreds of miles apart. Even though the cultivation of the knights in red armor was only one step away from the Heaven Gang realm, they could still barely see the outline of those black-armored soldiers. They were all wearing black scales, and their helmets were in the shape of a ferocious tiger's head. There were some words engraved on the left arm armor, but they could not see it clearly in the darkness. The leader of the knights in red armor was very clear that these black-armored soldiers would not be so bored to come here in the middle of the night to play, and they would not be standing on their route. The black machetes in their hands were made of some unknown metal, but they did not reflect a trace of light in the moonlight. This also showed that these black-armored soldiers were standing there silently, waiting for a battle. Barbarians of the Shuangjin dynasty, get out of the northern frontier immediately, or you will die without a complete corpse. The silent black-armored soldiers parted to the sides, and a similarly dressed general rode out from the center of the formation. However, this person did not wear a helmet. Instead, he used a golden crown to tie up his hair, and a black cloak behind his armor. His figure was incomparably tall and sturdy, and he looked like an iron tower. At the same time, torches suddenly lit up in the army of black-armored soldiers, illuminating these silent black-armored soldiers. At the same time, the general's facial features were also illuminated. He had a pair of sharp eagle-like eyebrows, and he was holding a machete upside down. His whole body emitted an extremely strong smell of blood. At this time, the knights in red armor saw two runes engraved on the left shoulder of their opponent in a language that they did not recognize. After a while, they vaguely recognized that it was Blackwater. The leader of the blood-armored knights had never heard of the Blackwater army in the north, so he had no idea what was going on in the minds of these fellows who were silently standing in front of them without any torches. The war horses they were riding were the specialties of the Frost dynasty. They were completely different from the war horses of the other 6 dynasties. The war horses of the other 6 dynasties were basically hybrids of demonic beasts and ordinary horses. Although their strength and endurance were not as good as real demonic beasts, They were more docile and could be controlled by those who had a little understanding of horsemanship. Moreover, when facing demonic beasts, the blood of demonic beasts that flowed in their veins would not make them lose their courage and collapse to the ground. However, the horses of the Shuangjin dynasty were not something that those hybrid horses could compare to. The horses they rode were demon beasts. Usually when they were fed, each horse would eat at least thousands of pounds of raw meat in a day. Otherwise, they would become ferocious and even their masters might be eaten by them. The knights in red armor riding demon beasts had never thought that anything could withstand their charge with just flesh and blood. Even Xin Lin Jun, who was recognized as the most elite soldier in the Shenwu dynasty, had to set up a series of barricades and traps to restrict the cavalry of the Shuangjin dynasty before he dared to fight them. The Blackwater army, who stood on their route without saying a word, was generally known as courting death. Of course, although the cavalry of the Shuangjin dynasty was terrifying, not all troops were equipped with such horses. For example, an official cavalry troop of the Shuangjin dynasty usually consisted of about 50,000 people. The standard equipment was a set of heavy armor, a lance, a scimitar, a bow, and armor-piercing arrows for knights. Together with 3 horses and 3 sets of heavy horse armor, the Shuangjin dynasty would spend more than 10,000 taels of gold to equip each knight. This was only the fixed cost of equipment. Not to mention the salary and rations of the knights, a single horse would eat at least 500 pounds of raw meat a day. A cavalry troop of 150,000 horses would eat 150 million pounds of raw meat a day. In order to pay for the rations of a cavalry troop, it meant that the cavalry troop would have to hunt at least 20 demon beasts of the Wisdom State or 5 demon beasts of the Mountain Lord State each day. Additionally, they would have to feed a large number of poultry and livestock to the front line. The Shuangjin dynasty was famous for its belligerence and poverty. If they wanted to survive, they had to constantly fight and plunder. Therefore, the people of the Shuangjin dynasty were called barbarians. In the Qianwu continent where the 7 great empires ruled, the reputation of Shuangjin barbarian was even worse than that of demon beasts. They were only a bit better than those evil cultists. The knights of the Shuangjin dynasty were the best in the world. However, they would never have imagined that the Blackwater army in front of them was an existence that was not inferior to them in terms of extravagance. The black scales on their bodies were not ordinary things. Lin Yuan would shed his skin every 2 months. Although the old skin he left behind was not as tough as his body, it was much better than the armor made by the 7 great empires using metal mixed with demon beast bones. However, most of the scales would be damaged during the shedding process, so there were not many that could be used to make armor. In the past 4 months, Lin Yuan had only raised this Blackwater army of 30,000 people. The black sabers in their hands were not made of metal, but the bones of a type of mastiff called Crimson Steel Mastiff. After being polished and improved by craftsmen, they became bone sabers that were as hard as mud. In any case, among the current military armors in the northern frontier, apart from the armor made from Lin Yuan's scales, there was really no armor that could withstand a scratch from these bone sabers. Apart from the preciousness of their equipment, these Blackwater army warriors ate demon beast meat that was at least in the late stage of the wisdom state every day. Even the water they drank was medicine that was soaked in 100-year-old spiritual items. There was only one word to describe the entire troop: expensive. Chapter 456. We of the Frost Empire will only fight to the death, not run. The leader of the blood-armored cavalry sneered and said coldly, "Since you know who we are, then you should know Shuai Liao's fighting style. Once you start fighting with us, we will fight to the death until there is only one person left. Little kid, are you prepared to die?" The general of the Blackwater army didn't want to waste any more words. He squeezed his horse's belly with his legs and in pain, the horse charged straight at the Blood Liao cavalry. He slowly raised his gleaming crescent blade. "You overestimate yourself." The leader of the Blood Liao cavalry sneered. "Little kid, remember this well. I am Wanyan de Guang, the 13th prince of the Shuangjin dynasty. You should be honored to die by my hands." In the eyes of the Blood Liao cavalry, this black-armored general's actions were indeed suicidal. This was because the entire Blackwater army was made up of infantrymen. When this general charged, the silent black-armored soldiers also took off their large shields embedded with black scales and charged in their direction. However, it was a taboo for infantrymen to clash with cavalry. The general of the Blackwater army looked like he didn't know what was good for him. He clearly knew that he was the only cavalryman in the entire army, but he still urged his horse forward first. This caused him to be derailed from the battle. Once he was trapped in their battle formation, it wouldn't be so easy to retreat. The two armies hadn't even started fighting yet, but their general had already been killed on the spot. Under such circumstances, even if these silent black-armored soldiers had steel-like willpower, their morale would still be shaken. The black-armored knight charged into the fray alone. He poured his chi into his crescent blade and cut down the scimitars coming at him like he was unstoppable. However, before he could kill the enemy, the Blood Liao cavalry in front of him urged their horses to get out of the way. Although the black-armored knight wanted to pull on the reins, how could he stop his horse at this speed? They had no choice but to plunge headfirst into the depths of the Blood Liao Knight's war and fall into a state of isolation and helplessness. This was a tactic that the Shui Liao cavalry often used to surround and kill generals with extraordinary martial arts. After all, a single person's strength was limited. Unless one's cultivation was at the Void Realm, one could forget about breaking through their formation. After all, the Shui Liao cavalry was one of the imperial army units of the Shuangjin dynasty, and not just any random person could be selected. Without a certain level of cultivation and background, how could one enter the imperial army? At this moment, the Blackwater army was still about 300 paces away from the Blood Liao Knights. They placed the black-armored knights into the formation, then surrounded the entrance to deal with the black-armored warriors outside. Once the general inside was stunned, they would toss his head out. They didn't believe that the black-armored warriors outside would grit their teeth and continue fighting. In fact, the Blood Liao Knights' strategy had been executed perfectly from the moment the black-armored knights were placed into the formation. But when it came to the encirclement, the style suddenly changed. Because the distance was getting closer and closer, the black-armored knights had long since abandoned their crescent scimitars and instead pulled out their black bone scimitars to engage in close combat. Whenever their bone scimitars fell, scimitars would break, horses would fall to the ground, and a Shui Liao knight would die on the spot. There were even a few unlucky fellows who were cut in half along with their horses. The bone scimitars of the black-armored knights were basically fatal, and if one couldn't dodge in time, they would end up crippled. But when the scimitars of the Blood Liao Knights landed on the black-armored knights, it was a different matter altogether. When the incredibly sharp scimitars landed on the black-scaled armor made of some unknown material, they could only leave faint white marks. Some of the scimitars that were of inferior quality even snapped after drawing sparks, the tips of the scimitars even stabbing into the bodies of their own comrades. What the hell is this? The eyes of the 13th prince, who had been spouting nonsense at the start, nearly popped out of their sockets. Whether it was his scimitars or his cavalry spears, none of them could break through the enemy's defenses. But the enemy was like a tiger in a flock of sheep, killing them with a single scimitar. And at this moment, the black-armored soldiers who couldn't hold their own charged forward. Whether it was the scimitars or the blows of their shields, the outer formation only lasted for a moment before it was completely torn apart. What followed next was a one-sided slaughter. Logically speaking, although the 13th prince wasn't a famous general and couldn't compare to Yan Xingqi or Lei Qiuxing in terms of military strategy, he definitely had no problem competing with rising stars like Li Zhongxing and Zhang Qilin. If someone had told him in the past that an infantry corps could suppress cavalry despite the disadvantage in numbers, he would have definitely dismissed that person's words as nonsense. Even now, he still didn't know how to command this battle. From the chaotic battle, he could vaguely see that the cavalry were incomparably vicious. When the enemy attacked with a single scimitar, they could often attack with 2 or 3 scimitars in a row. But this was of no use. If one scimitar couldn't break their armor, then 3 scimitars couldn't break their armor. But when the enemy's scimitar came down, both men and horses were wiped out. Of course, the 13th prince wasn't the only one who was paying attention to this battlefield. At the periphery of Shunning City, on a temporary observation tower, Xia Xiyu was observing the battle through a telescope. The corner of his mouth kept rising as he clicked his tongue and said, "Killer weapon, big killer weapon." Also on the observation tower was a projection of Lin Yuan. A pair of different colored eyes fell on the battlefield and said coldly, "Are you satisfied with this gift from this king?" Xia Xiyu nodded crazily and laughed, "Yes. I'm so satisfied. If it weren't for the small number with this Blackwater army, I would have been able to wipe out the remnants of the aristocratic families and sects on the northern frontier without anyone's help." Lin Yuan shook his head gently and sneered, "That's not your job. These Shui Liao cavalry weren't defeated soldiers who accidentally ran into the northern frontier. They were able to pass through the territories of various rebel armies in the north, and they were able to hide from the eyes and ears of the Imperial Secret Guards and Li Zhongxing at the front line. They were able to send a group of 50,000 Shuangjin dynasty knights into our territory. This isn't something an ordinary person can do. Xia Xiyu's smile stopped abruptly. He put down the telescope in his hand and said coldly, "Sir Shifter Emperor, do you mean that someone is plotting against us behind our backs? Who is it? The one on the other side of the Wei River?" Lin Yuan shook his head again and said indifferently, "Lei Qiuxing is still counting on us to help him fight the rebel armies in the north, and help him wipe out the aristocratic families in the north. It's already unkind of him to not give us money and food. Do you think he's still plotting against us?" Then, Xia Xiyu paused for a moment, and the killing intent in his eyes grew stronger. Chapter 457. At present, the Xinwu dynasty seemed to be in chaos, but in fact, it was not a certain family or a certain person. It was the imperial power group headed by Zhang Xiu and Lei Qiuxing. It was the magnate group with the aristocratic families and sects as its backbone. It was the southern group with Lei Qiuming and the southern merchants as its backbone. It was the northern frontier group headed by Lin Yuan. These four forces were the real culprits under all the chaos in the Xinwu dynasty, and they were also the ones who could laugh to the end in this chaos. The other three forces were Lin Yuan's biggest opponents now, and they were also the enemies that he had to face in order to unify the whole Xinwu dynasty. Although the current situation was not clear, everyone could see that since Lin Yuan implemented the new policy in the northern frontier, the attitude of the aristocratic families and sects in the Xinwu dynasty had changed slightly. In this power game where the four forces fought against each other, the magnate group that was attacked by the other three forces at the same time was bound to be the first to be kicked out, and this process was constantly accelerating. However, during this period of time when the magnate group was about to be kicked out, the attitude of each family was very important. Among the three forces, the weakest one had to be chosen to suppress the other two forces at the same time, and it was also the last buffer. When this force was swallowed up by the other two forces, it would be the time for the final winner to be chosen. "You and the Blackwater Army will leave the northern frontier starting tomorrow." Lin Yuan glanced at Xia Xiyu and still said calmly, "Li Zhongxing will arrange a ship to send you to the south. When you get there, there will naturally be someone to pick you up. You just have to listen to his command. His thoughts are my thoughts. Even if he makes a mistake, it is my responsibility. Do you understand?" To put it bluntly, Lin Yuan was very clear that what he had done in the north had violated the interests of the whole south. Once he opened up the situation here, the Xinwu dynasty would be free to reorganize the south. At that time, whether it was Lei Qiuxing who wanted to arm wrestle with Lei Qiuxing, or the interest groups in the south who wanted to gain benefits in this chaotic world, not only would they not get the price they wanted, but they would also have to face the troops of the Xinwu dynasty and bear the losses that they should not bear. Therefore, these Shuiliao cavalrymen from the Shuangjian dynasty, under the promise of some people, quietly bypassed the main battlefield between the northern frontier and the Xinwu dynasty, and used the passage opened for them by the aristocratic families in the northern frontier to sneak into the northern frontier. They planned to take advantage of tonight when the entire army of the northern frontier was focused on the three rebellious cities, and then spread their influence to other gathering places, causing chaos in the northern frontier. They would not give up until they forced the northern frontier to return to the front line for the southern expedition to quell the rebellion. However, no one expected that Lin Yuan still had a luxurious Blackwater army in his hands. If it is those people in the south, these Shuangjian barbarian cavalrymen should not be the killer. Should we set off later? Xia Xiyu pondered for a moment, and his face suddenly showed a serious expression. Although he was more bloodthirsty due to his personality, and perhaps not outstanding in strategy, his clarity of mind in the face of danger was definitely second to none in the northern frontier. Otherwise, Lin Yuan would not have trusted Xia Xiyu with the task of cleaning up the remnants of the sects in the northern frontier. They have other cards, but don't I? If they want to stir up trouble in the northern frontier, if I don't give the nod, they will die. Although it was only a projection without any combat power, when Lin Yuan's voice sounded, Xia Xiyu could clearly feel the unparalleled aura from Lin Yuan's body, and even subconsciously shivered. "I have other things to do, so I will leave the command here to you. After cleaning up these Shuangjian barbarian cavalrymen, you will set off immediately." When Lin Yuan finished speaking, the projection had already dissipated. At this moment, the battle at the front had reached a climax. The 13th prince looked at the one-sided battle with bloodshot eyes and said fiercely, "If you can't deal with these infantrymen, then don't fight them head-on. Use the mobility of the cavalry and drag these infantrymen down. I don't believe that such sturdy armor can be as light as cloth. Go around them and we can still slaughter the northern frontier." After all, the 13th prince was in existence who had been on the battlefield for a long time. He knew very well that there was no absolute victory or defeat on the battlefield. Although the Blackwater army had stopped them here, once they displayed the mobility of the cavalry, these damned infantrymen could only eat dust behind them. When the cities of the northern frontier fell one by one into their hands, these black-armored soldiers would only feel more and more despair. The 13th prince of the Shuangjin dynasty? Remember, the one who will kill you is Zhao Guangchong. The young general who had taken the lead and killed his way into the battle with the Shuai cavalrymen raised the machete in his hand. After forcing away 7 or 8 Shuai cavalrymen, he showed no signs of fear and directly charged toward the 13th prince, who was commanding the battle. Just as the other party had said, although the armor of the Blackwater army didn't affect the movement speed of the soldiers like heavy armor, it was still extremely difficult for the infantrymen to run as fast as these pure-blooded demon warhorses. If these Shuangjin barbarian cavalrymen were really allowed to escape, then the defense and attack that they were so proud of would be equivalent to nothing. One man and one horse cut a bloody path through the cavalry formation of the Shuangjin dynasty and headed straight for the 13th prince. The 13th prince was terrified. He waved the machete in his hand and roared angrily, "Are you all F***king idiots? This general of the northern frontier is wearing that strange black armor. Just cut off his head. Why do you have to attack his body?" The deputy general who accompanied the 13th prince sighed and reached out to grab the 13th prince's reins. He said in a low voice, "This general of the northern frontier is quite extraordinary. Those cavalrymen won't be able to do anything to him. Your Highness, take your personal guards and go ahead. I will go and meet him." As soon as he finished speaking, the deputy general skillfully turned the 13th prince's warhorse around and then used the scabbard to viciously slap the horse's butt. He watched as the 13th prince and his horse quickly disappeared from sight. Only then did he pull the reins and turn the horse around to meet the enemy. However, at this time, Zhao Guangchong was already standing in front of him in a daze. The deputy general didn't even have time to raise the machete in his hand before he felt a chill on his neck. His vision spun, and before his consciousness completely dissipated, he vaguely saw a headless corpse on the back of a horse. Zhao Guangchong? What a familiar name. Xia Xiu reached out to touch his chin. A moment later, a touch of surprise flashed through his eyes. What the F***ck? The Northern Frontier Academy set up a martial arts class in Shunning City for only 2 months, and they have already discovered such a fierce general? Is it because there are too many talents buried in the Northern Frontier, or is the Northern Frontier Academy of the Demon Emperor too abnormal? Chapter 458. Whoosh. A sharp sound broke through the air, interrupting Xia Xiu's contemplation. A fire arrow with a lit arrowhead swayed in the darkness as if it had pierced through the darkness. Its speed was several times faster than those terrifying demonic beasts and warhorses. From the moment Xia Xiu realized that the arrow had appeared, less than 3 breaths of time had passed before the 13th prince, who had been galloping on his horse, fell from the back of his horse in fear. However, the fast, accurate, and ruthless arrow was merely a signal. Immediately after, hundreds and thousands of flaming arrows were shot out from Shunning City behind Xia Xiu. They exceeded the range that people originally knew and accurately shot down the 13th prince's personal guards one by one. On the other side, the black-armored soldiers had also completely cleared the area. The Shuai cavalry that had stayed behind had now become corpses strewn all over the ground. About 30 Shuai cavalry had knelt down and begged to surrender. However, what they received in response was a brazen descent of bone knives. No surrender, no begging to surrender, no advancing without military orders, no retreating without military orders. When they moved, they were like fire, and when they were still, they were like a mountain. These were the requirements of the Blackwater army that Lin Yuan had secretly trained. As the killing of the enemy ended, the archers who had killed the Shuai cavalry slowly walked out of Shunning City. These archers were also wearing armor woven from black dragon scales, but the materials used were much smaller. It was more like the attire worn by hunters on the northern frontier. Sharp daggers made from the bones of crimson steel mastiffs were tied to their calves, which seemed to be their only weapon for close combat. Each archer carried 3 quivers on their back, and the arrows they used were also made from the bones of crimson steel mastiffs. Each quiver was filled with 25 arrows. When this group of about 20,000 to 30,000 archers fired a volley of arrows, even Shin Lin Jun would be shot into a sieve. After all, crimson steel mastiffs were famous in the northern frontier. Their bones could be used as sharp weapons with a little polishing. Moreover, the flesh of these demonic beasts would bring a lot of heat for an hour after consumption. In the past, the hunters who hunted in the Hengduan Mountains would always carry 1 or 2 kilograms of crimson steel mastiff's flesh with them. Even if the mountains were blocked by heavy snow, they would not freeze to death in the mountains. The crimson steel mastiffs had a very strong reproductive ability. If 2 crimson steel mastiffs of the opposite sex had enough food, they could expand their population to nearly 1,000 in just 2 months. Even if a crimson steel mastiff hadn't awakened to become a demonic beast, it could still easily kill tigers and leopards. However, their lifespans were very short. Even intelligence realm crimson steel mastiffs could only live for 20 years. Moreover, once they died for more than 4 hours, their flesh and bones would become a pile of garbage. They had to be preserved using special methods. Most importantly, although crimson steel mastiffs could be seen everywhere on the northern frontier, once they reached adulthood, they could fight against spirit awakening realm demonic beasts. Moreover, once they became demonic beasts, they could easily fight against demonic beasts of a higher realm. Due to their short lifespans, the crimson steel mastiff's cultivation speed was extremely terrifying. A 3-year-old crimson steel mastiff was at least intelligence realm level 6. Without a certain level of strength, anyone who provoked them would die. It was worth mentioning that the crimson steel mastiffs were very protective of each other. In the northern frontier, tigers had wantonly hunted and killed crimson steel mastiffs, resulting in a beast tide. When faced with a beast tide made up of crimson steel mastiffs, the 7 border cities had joined forces and paid the price of nearly 1 million casualties to repel the beast tide. Therefore, the flesh and bones of crimson steel mastiffs were extremely valuable items on the northern frontier. However, in Lin Yuan's hands they were worthless toys. He had casually produced tens of thousands of sets of bows, bone blades, and daggers for the Blackwater Army. Just these weapons alone were comparable to 3 Frost Mirror Corps at the same level as the Blood Liao Knights. This one-sided slaughter seemed spectacular, but after comparing the equipment of both sides, it seemed reasonable. This general, Qin Yu, greets the commander. A tall young man walked out from the group of archers. He looked to be in his 20s and had a strong body. His eyes were especially cold even when he was not in a combat state. Xia Xiu couldn't help but think of Xiao En, who was currently in charge of the demon-human army. It was just that he didn't know whose shooting skills were more terrifying, compared to the archers who called themselves tree elves under Xiao En. It seemed unreasonable that Lin Yuan could raise a force like the Blackwater Army in just 2 months. However, when Xia Xiu thought about it carefully, he still felt that it was reasonable. After all, the northern frontier had always been known for its bitter cold. Anyone who had the slightest ability in the northern frontier would develop towards the south. As for those who stayed in the northern frontier, even if they had extraordinary talent, they could not make a name for themselves under the control of the aristocratic families and sects in the northern frontier. Even if they could obtain resources for cultivation, true geniuses would not be willing to be dogs for others. Just like the first-generation members of the Association of the Demon Emperor who followed Lin Yuan, they were all outstanding people. Otherwise, they would not have been able to develop the Association of the Demon Emperor to its current scale. However, they never thought of themselves as Lin Yuan's dogs. This was because even if Lin Yuan wanted to command them to do something, he would have to pay a corresponding price as a reward. Therefore, the relationship between the two parties had always been that of collaborators. Whether it was Qin Yu or Zhao Guangchong, they were all geniuses who had been buried in the northern frontier. Lin Yuan gave them resources and a stage, and they immediately shed their dusty appearance and were replaced by the current Blackwater Army. They had received benefits from Lin Yuan, so naturally they would serve Lin Yuan. Of course, if there was a better place to go, Lin Yuan would not stop them. This was because whether it was Lin Yuan or them, they all believed that even if the 7 grand dynasties tried their best to catch up, their potential would not be comparable to the future northern frontier. After all, what they were going to play with next were all left behind by Lin Yuan. Of course, this was because these geniuses had been buried for too long. In addition, the refugees from all over the world had flooded into the northern frontier. This was why so many promising talents could emerge in such a short period of time. Once the Northern Frontier Academy had been established for a long time, the geniuses would be discovered one by one. The remaining people would require a large amount of time and resources to nurture. It would be impossible for so many terrifying existences to emerge without anyone noticing. You are the private soldiers trained by the Demon Emperor. Regarding this mission, you know about it earlier than me and are more detailed than me. Xia Xiu nodded at Qin Yu and said expressionlessly, What we are going to do next is to go to the south and perfectly carry out the mission given by the Demon Emperor. Everyone relies on their own abilities to make a living, so I won't say those cheering words." At this point, Xia Xiu paused and said loudly, "Now everyone line up and prepare to depart." Chapter 459. "Ah, Lord Dragon King, you have given me a good show." Ding Zai followed behind Lin Yuan, smiling as he flattered Lin Yuan. Through the same method of projection, Lin Yuan showed Ding Zai the video of the first battle between the Blackwater Army and the Blood Liao Cavalry. Towards this Blackwater Army that had suddenly appeared, even someone as strong as Ding Zai had to be vigilant. This was because the time it took for the Blackwater archers to reach Xia Xiu from Shunning City did not exceed 5 breaths. The shooting distance was also far beyond Ding Zai's knowledge. If he was in the position of the Blood Liao Cavalry, he would never have thought that the archers of the northern frontier could kill these people from such a long distance. Similarly, as long as Lin Yuan ambushed an army of the same level as the Blackwater archers, they would only need 1 round of shooting. Ding Zai's cultivation that he was so proud of would not be of any use. Before he had stepped into the Void Realm, these archers could easily take his life. If flattery was useful, the divine martial empire would not have fallen to such a state. Lin Yuan's strange-colored eyes paused on Ding Zai for a moment. He sneered, "You people keep saying that you have no thoughts about the Sky Martial continent. The so-called 7 great empires, the various aristocratic families, and the killing between the sects in your eyes, are like ants fighting. But once things are out of your control, you will always think of using force to change everything into what you think it should be. The chaos of the Xinwu dynasty was like this, and everything that happened in the northern frontier tonight was also like this." After being unmasked by Lin Yuan, Ding Zai only felt cold sweat on his back. He braced himself and said, "Lord Demon Emperor, although those big shots above have already transcended the secular world, their inheritance needs to be left behind. Their disciples also need resources to cultivate. If we let the secular world continue to fight like this, there will be fewer and fewer people guarding the gate of heaven. This world sooner or later will fall. What are you afraid of? I didn't say what you did was wrong." Lin Yuan glanced at Ding Zai and said with a faint smile, "It's just that your selfishness is too heavy. You all want to have absolute control over the so-called secular world. In fact, in the end, you all still haven't transcended enough. You still care about who you listen to in this little piece of land that you control. I don't believe that with the 7 great empires united, the resources that can be provided can't be compared to the current situation where each of you is doing your own thing. Even more so, I don't believe that the demonic beast clan can cause chaos in the world once they leave their gathering place. The matter of the demonic beasts is indeed not easy to handle." Ding Zai shook his head with a bitter smile and said solemnly, "It's not that I'm not willing to do my best for Lord Spirit Demon Emperor, it's just that the Spirit Demon race and Spirit Demon race have been at odds with each other for too long, and both sides hate each other. Once the shackles of the Spirit Demon beasts are released, even if the world is not in chaos, but the various places will definitely not be as peaceful as they are now, and a massacre that will engulf the entire Sky Martial continent is inevitable. It's not easy." Lin Yuan continued to follow Ding Zai's words, and the coldness in his eyes intensified. He said coldly, "In the end, isn't it just that the demonic beast clan has too few experts guarding outside the Heaven's Gate? Without the right to speak, there is naturally no space for survival. What those fellows can protect is the Hengduan mountain range, a place for the demonic beasts to reproduce." Ding Zai bowed to Lin Yuan, but didn't dare to open his mouth to continue the conversation. The truth was the same as what Lin Yuan had thought. The demonic beast clan had too few experts, and without the peak experts to speak, the demonic beasts could only live like livestock that could be slaughtered. But the truth was like this, and words couldn't be said so bluntly. Otherwise, other than offending others, there wouldn't be any benefits. In 4 months, the northern frontier has grown from nothing. Not to mention that I can annex the Xinwu dynasty, but if I use all my trump cards, it's just like playing a game if I want to rule the Xinwu dynasty across the Wei River." Lin Yuan didn't even look at Ding Zai, and continued to walk in the direction of Taizong City. He said indifferently, "My meaning is very clear. You can go back and ask your superiors. It's your business what you think of my proposal, but whether I do it or not, you can't stop me. Pardon me for asking, but if we agree, what can the demonic beast emperor do? If we don't agree, what can the demonic beast emperor do?" Ding Zai stretched out his hand to wipe the cold sweat on his forehead, and asked with a respectful expression. He was very clear that the black Jiao in front of him had countless ways to kill him, but the other party's request was too big, and it was no longer something that a small fry like him could decide. So he had to figure out Lin Yuan's context and bottom line before he could decide how to report to his superiors. Do you agree or not? The whole north of the Jianghu dynasty will also be under my rule. Lin Yuan grinned and said, if you are willing to give me this status, I can guarantee that the resources in your hands will be much more than when the Jianghu dynasty controlled the north. You can see this by looking at the northern frontier now. The territory that can only slowly decay in their hands and be slowly annexed by the aristocratic families will blossom in a different light in my hands. Speaking of this, Lin Yuan paused for a moment, narrowed his eyes and added, of course if they don't agree the other 6 dynasties will definitely not let me go. But with the Hengduan mountain as a shield, this king is not afraid of challenges. If they defeat this king, the northern frontier will become what it was before. You won't lose but you won't gain. But if they can't defeat this king, gulp. Ding Zai swallowed a mouthful of saliva heavily. Then what this king wants is not as simple as the north of the Jianghu dynasty. Lin Yuan's voice sounded slowly. Ding Zai suddenly felt that the temperature around him seemed to have dropped by dozens of degrees. He couldn't help but start to shiver. He said slowly, Demon Emperor, you are making trouble for me. Lord Shifter Emperor, you are making things difficult for me. Although our Jianghu Association has a certain degree of control in the Jianghu dynasty, you can also see that Lei Qiuxing is gradually dissatisfied with being controlled by us. Otherwise things wouldn't have escalated to this point. If you want the northern territory we will definitely be willing to give it to you. However we can't control Lei Qiuxing's opinion right now. Then there's the other 6 empires. That's not something our Upper Deer Association can control. You also know that all the families and sects are now in control of this area. For example, the Jianghu dynasty is not only controlled by our Jianghu Association, but also the other 6 dynasties. I will definitely report your request truthfully, but you know how difficult it is to get everyone to agree. Even if you are destined to become one of those big shots in the future, you definitely don't have the face to do so now. If you want me to persuade the other big shots to agree, that's fine. But the question is, what can you give us? Chapter 460. As long as you ask, this king can give you anything. But the problem is, does the Jianghu society dare to take all of this for themselves? Lin Yuan's voice was filled with mockery. His words were still aimed at Ding Zai's Achilles heel. The northern frontier was now in high demand. Even if those big shots who guarded the heavenly gates said that they were not interested in the secular world, Lin Yuan felt that these fellows who were still attached to secular power were not so easy to get rid of. Otherwise, existences like the Jianghu Society, the Four Alliance Society, and even Zhang Xiu would not constantly think of infiltrating the northern frontier. However, with the current prosperous conditions of the northern frontier, it was not something that could be done by any Tom, Dick, or Harry. First, the operation of the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce required a demonic beast that could control the situation. Furthermore, this demonic beast had to have a good view of the overall situation. It would not take all the benefits for itself. It had to know who to give benefits to and who not to give benefits to. It had to be able to make everyone obediently acknowledge the existence of the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce. It was not like what the Ether Society thought, that any random beast king would be able to take over the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce. To put it bluntly, the beast kings in the Hengduan Mountains were all arrogant and unruly existences. If they fell out with each other, who would be easy to provoke? Lin Yuan could be said to have a halo around him. Firstly, he had the endorsement of 3 great beast kings and the favor of Beast King Kirin. They even privately believed that Lin Yuan would be the next Beast King's successor. Other than these objective factors, there was also the Scarlet Flame Swamp next to the Stoneclaw Forest and some of the Beast King's territories. Now it had completely turned into a paradise for the demonic beasts. Without Lin Yuan as a shield, who knew how many Beast Kings would suffer? The most important thing is that Lin Yuan has the merit of opening up new territories. Ever since the demonic beasts retreated into the Hengduan Mountains and struggled at death's door, their greatest achievement was to temporarily destroy the cities built by humans near the demonic beast forest. However, just like how the beast tide reduced the number of low-level demonic beasts, these border cities were also a means for humans to reduce the excess population. However, Lin Yuan was different from the demonic beasts in the Hengduan Mountains. His achievements were real. Now, the entire northern frontier was like a sweet cake in Lin Yuan's hands. Except for Lin Yuan, no one could even think of ordering the northern frontier. If another demonic beast replaced Lin Yuan's position and didn't get the approval of the beast kings in the Hengduan Mountains, they would think that if they could take over Lin Yuan's territory, why couldn't they? At that time, a battle would be inevitable. But even if they could figure out who could take over the northern frontier's territory, it would still depend on the attitude of the prince's mansion in the northern frontier. After all, Lin Yuan controlled the northern frontier because these people were obedient to him. Even if they weren't loyal to Lin Yuan, they still had to obediently work for Lin Yuan. However, once Lin Yuan was gone, and another demonic beast replaced him, the prince's mansion in the northern frontier would have the right to choose. What was the use of being willing to cooperate with the prince's mansion in the northern frontier? It was hard to say whether they would even take a liking to you. This was also the main reason why Lin Yuan could be so arrogant in front of Ding Zai, because behind all the prosperity in the northern frontier, it couldn't be separated from him, the black Jiao who appeared out of nowhere. Before they could think of a way to replace Lin Yuan, once something happened to Lin Yuan, the great situation in the northern frontier would be gone. The so-called high buildings could also collapse in an instant. Sir Demon Emperor, please don't play word games with me. Ding Zai changed his previous submissive attitude and looked at Lin Yuan seriously, saying in a deep voice, "You can skillfully divide every piece of cake in your hands between the northern frontier and the Hengduan Mountains, then you also have the ability to let everyone eat the benefits. As the saying goes, the upper deer society eats alone, please don't say any more. The upper deer society doesn't dare and won't eat alone." Eating alone was delicious, but it was easy to choke to death. Now, the output of the northern frontier alone was comparable to half of the Shenwu dynasty. Just the fact that the upper deer society was connected to Lin Yuan alone made many forces jealous. In terms of distribution of benefits, if Lin Yuan was determined to give the upper deer society too much, the various forces wouldn't touch Lin Yuan, but they would definitely attack the upper deer society together until their forces in the secular world were completely destroyed. Then what do I want you for? Without you, Butcher Ding, can't I eat pigs with hair? If you aren't willing to show your sincerity to talk to me, then let's not talk. I believe there are many people who are willing to talk to me. Lin Yuan's tone became more and more playful, and his words became more and more bold. Of course, it was impossible for the upper deer society to eat alone, because Lin Yuan giving them special treatment was no different from feeding them poison. However, as an existence that was connected to Lin Yuan, no one would have any objections if the upper deer society took more. This was because this was one of the advantages of the upper deer society. Otherwise, Ding Zai wouldn't insist on tying himself to Lin Yuan. However, how to control this still required everyone to sit down and slowly negotiate. Ding Zai's current intention was obviously to let Lin Yuan suffer in silence. It was no problem to give a large amount of benefits to the upper deer society for a name, but these benefits definitely wouldn't be included in the cake shared by everyone. They were all from Lin Yuan's own pocket. As a person in his previous life, Lin Yuan had experienced countless schemes and schemes. Ding Zai's little scheme naturally couldn't escape his eyes. Since they weren't willing to talk, then they might as well not talk. Everyone would shed all pretense of cordiality and not interact with each other. In any case, Lin Yuan was now very sensitive. No one could guarantee that they wouldn't get involved if they touched him, so no one would touch him. Especially after the matter with Kong Lezin, when the various clans sent experts to attack the northern frontier, they would have to consider whether Lin Yuan had the ability to make their experts stay in the northern frontier forever. And to use the power of the secular world? That was even more of a joke. Any of the 7 great empires would definitely not gain any advantage if they went head-to-head with Lin Yuan. Who would be willing to suffer such a loss? This is your last chance. I want you to reach the bottom line of the upper deer society. If you still make me feel that you are not sincere, then let's not talk anymore. Lin Yuan stared at Ding Zai and directly used his killer move. In any case, there are countless pairs of eyes staring at the northern frontier. Once you reach the upper deer society, the negotiations with this king will fall apart. There are plenty of people who are willing to put down their status and have a good chat with this king on how to divide the benefits. Forced into a corner by Lin Yuan, Ding Zai helplessly sighed and said in a deep voice, "If Lord Demon Emperor says so, then I have no other choice. Frankly speaking, the upper deer society will have to pay a price to persuade the other clans. You also know that although everyone is willing to facilitate this matter, whoever speaks will be ruthlessly ripped off. And this price will definitely not be paid by the upper deer society. Do you understand?" Chapter 461. Understood. Lin Yuan nodded slightly. Since the Jianghu Association had contacted him, they would definitely get a bigger share of the cake than the others. It might not be obvious once or twice, but over time, it would be a considerable amount of wealth. If it was exchanged for cultivation resources, it would be enough for the younger generation of the Jianghu Association to pull ahead of the younger generation of the other factions by a large margin. Although everyone had tacitly agreed to such a matter, it did not mean that everyone could pinch their noses and accept it. Before they split the cake, everyone would definitely sit together and ruthlessly rip off the Jianghu Association. This price would definitely not be a small sum. Even the Jianghu Association would have to suffer a loss. Therefore, unless it was absolutely necessary, the Jianghu Association would definitely not agree. Unless this price was paid by Lin Yuan. Seeing that Lin Yuan had given an affirmative answer, Ding Zai clearly heaved a sigh of relief. Therefore, we have nothing else to discuss. Please return. The teasing in Lin Yuan's voice disappeared and was replaced by an unwavering indifference. Lord Demon Emperor. Ding Zai watched as Lin Yuan's speed suddenly increased and instantly disappeared from his sight. He suddenly felt a stifling sensation in his chest. The Jianghu Association was a faction with a top-notch expert overseeing it. They had always placed great importance on nurturing their younger generation. Ding Zai being able to form a connection with Lin Yuan gave him a lot of bonus points. Once this deal was concluded, Ding Zai would definitely receive a lot of rewards when he returned to the Jianghu Association. However, apart from the results, there was also a process. Therefore, the Jianghu Association also paid attention to how to negotiate the division of benefits with Lin Yuan. The more Lin Yuan paid, the less the Jianghu Association would have to pay, and the more benefits Ding Zai would receive. Therefore, Ding Zai repeatedly bargained with Lin Yuan. In the end, Ding Zai still hoped that Lin Yuan would pay all the price. So now that Lin Yuan had abandoned him, Ding Zai actually couldn't even refute him. Because until just now Lin Yuan had given him enough face. It was his own greed that caused Lin Yuan to leave. Moreover, he didn't expect that Lin Yuan would be able to infer the thoughts and concerns of those people even though he hadn't come into contact with them. At the same time, Ding Zai was clear about his own position. He understood that even if the negotiations fell through, there would still be other forces contacting him. So Lin Yuan wasn't in a hurry at all. A sneer suddenly rang out, and a moment later, a figure wearing a black hooded robe appeared out of thin air on a nearby tree trunk. The black-clothed man looked down at Ding Zai and clicked his tongue. Listen, no wonder he's an ambitious and ruthless person. Without you, Butcher Ding, wouldn't he still be eating hairy pigs? I gave you so many chances, but you didn't cherish them. Ah. Then it's our lofty gorge estate's turn to reap the benefits. As his voice faded, the black-clothed man flashed and disappeared from Ding Zai's sight once again. Ding Zai's face was crimson red. Just as he was about to step forward to stop him, another two figures dressed similarly to the previous black-clothed man suddenly appeared in front of him. The two of them didn't say a single word as they brandished their long sabers and attacked Ding Zai from both sides. It was obvious that they had planned this for a long time and didn't want Ding Zai to leave this place at all. You're courting death. Ding Zai's face darkened. His body surged with energy and without dodging, he directly grabbed the two long sabers and shattered them. Then, without even retracting his hands, he grabbed the throats of the two black-clothed men and killed them in an instant. Only then did he move to chase in the direction that the previous black-clothed man and Lin Yuan had disappeared. About 4 to 5 breaths later, Ding Zai arrived at a clearing that had been cut out. Only then did he realize that on those tree stumps, there were many familiar and unfamiliar existences sitting there. It was obvious that the various top forces were very eager to invest in Lin Yuan, this potential stock. Therefore, after Ding Zai angered Lin Yuan, these monsters all emerged from the corners and gathered here. Ding Zai couldn't help but feel his scalp go numb. Looking at Lin Yuan, who was surrounded by the crowd, a feeling of fear suddenly spread out from the depths of Ding Zai's heart. The current Ding Zai's thoughts of persuading Lin Yuan to pay the price and let Upper Deer Association gain a large share of the benefits had completely vanished when he saw these monsters. Ding Zai was very clear about the methods of Upper Deer Association. Towards traitors and trash, Upper Deer Association had always been merciless. The originally favorable situation had collapsed because of his greed. Now that Ding Zai had completely sobered up, he was very clear that he had offended Lin Yuan. If he returned to Upper Deer Association, he would definitely be punished and reprimanded. Moreover, if Lin Yuan were to form connections with others and completely throw Upper Deer Association to the side, then he, Ding Zai, would definitely have no way out. All of you, stop making so much noise. Ding Zai's eyes were bloodshot as he took 2 steps forward. Suddenly he roared. Feeling the mocking, curious and mocking gazes, Ding Zai quickly walked to Lin Yuan's side. His gaze swept across the people that represented the various forces and loudly said, I, Ding Zai, have done something wrong. I accept my punishment. However, it's not a good idea for all of you to gather here and make a ruckus like a bunch of women. If all of you keep on chattering like this, you won't be able to come up with anything by the time the sun rises. Then tell us, what should we do? The black-clothed man from Lofty Gorge Prefecture sneered and coldly said, Don't tell me that you still haven't woken up from your dream and still think that Lord Shifter Emperor still treats your Upper Deer Association as a treasure? You have to know that there are many forces that are on par with your Upper Deer Association. There are even more than 10 forces that are stronger than your Upper Deer Association. If you want to snatch food from the tiger's mouth, why don't you take a look at yourself first? The moment the black-clothed man finished speaking, the surrounding forces all roared with laughter. Lofty Gorge Prefecture and Upper Deer Association were on par with each other. Moreover, they were both top forces that controlled a region of the Jianghu dynasty. Both sides usually had friction with each other. Although it wasn't to the extent of alerting the higher-ups, there were fights between those below the Void Realm every day. The black-clothed man humiliating Ding Zai was within everyone's expectations. The reason why these forces cooperated with the black-clothed man was mostly because of jealousy and hatred. When Upper Deer Association first entered the northern frontier, they didn't have any good intentions. However, Ding Zai just had to mix with Lin Yuan, and both sides even had a period of sweetness. At one point, the various forces felt that Upper Deer Association would definitely be able to seize control of the northern frontier and become the strongest existence among the top forces behind the Jianghu dynasty. At that time, most of the secular forces in Lofty Gorge Prefecture would be destroyed, and they wouldn't end up well either. However, Ding Zai screwed up himself and made Lin Yuan decisively abandon Upper Deer Association. Only then did they have a chance. If they didn't take revenge on Ding Zai for being on tenterhooks, they really wouldn't be able to swallow this anger. Chapter 462. I'm not treating myself as a treasure. I'm just saying that you guys won't be able to come to a conclusion even if you quarrel here. Ding Zai regained some of his composure amidst the laughter. He took 2 steps forward with a cold face and said in a low voice, To put it bluntly, isn't it a hot potato for any of you to obtain something that the Upper Deer Council can't get? Can the High Gorge residents take it? Can the Four-Way Alliance take it? Whoever takes this benefit won't incur the wrath of the masses. The moment he said that, the surrounding representatives all lowered their heads, not daring to look at Ding Zai directly. Indeed, the northern frontier was too tempting. Furthermore, Lin Yuan's ambition was not just the northern frontier. He had the ambition and the ability to make the entire north his territory. By then, the benefits of the entire north would definitely be shared by everyone. But the northern frontier was now independent. Whoever could gain more from the northern frontier would become stronger in the future. But their strength would definitely cause their opponents to be unable to sit still. By then, it was not impossible for them to be ganged up on. Then what do you say, what should we do? One of the representatives scratched his head and asked in a low, muffled voice. Let's bid. Ding Zai's lips curled up. That ordinary face suddenly had a hint of madness. He said loudly, Aren't you all here talking to the Demon Emperor about the benefits of choosing you? Then let's use our abilities to speak. Whoever can make the Demon Emperor complete this matter with the lowest price will take that share. By then no one can say anything. How about it? The moment Ding Zai's voice fell, all the representatives began to whisper among themselves. But when they were discussing, they looked at Ding Zai as if they were looking at a lunatic. Just as Ding Zai said, it was actually useless for them to gather here and talk nonsense with Lin Yuan. Because none of the representatives were fools. They would not let go of such a fat piece of meat like the northern frontier. So, they were all lowering their own conditions and getting closer to the bottom line given by their superiors. Including Ding Zai, all these people had the same attitude. This piece of meat from the northern frontier must be eaten, even if the price was as low as chicken ribs and tasteless. This was because no matter how much they paid to take over the northern frontier, there would definitely be a day when they would be able to make a small profit. However, if they allowed others to take over the northern frontier, they would be ostracized sooner or later. They might not even be able to defend their current territory. Therefore, they were just wasting time here because everyone had the same goal. If they ate it, they wouldn't give it to them even if they felt nauseous. However, no one would be as straightforward as Ding Zai. What Ding Zai was doing now was equivalent to letting them bid. Everyone would call out their bottom line price one by one. Whoever gave the lowest price would be one step closer to taking over the northern frontier. But to be honest, doing such things behind people's backs wasn't a big deal. But if you did it in public, it would be too embarrassing. Ding Zai's suggestion was obviously to make everyone lose face together. Originally they could still negotiate with Lin Yuan. But now, it had become the lowest price to take over the northern frontier. The gap between them could be imagined. Using the bidding method to settle this matter, it was impossible for so many people to argue. When the time came, they would just have to call out one by one. If they couldn't suppress the other, they wouldn't have a chance. They couldn't possibly sell off their own underwear just to disgust others, right? This fellow must be crazy. The representative from Lofty Gorge Prefecture muttered softly. His eyes were filled with helplessness. Who would have thought that after being rejected by Lin Yuan, Ding Zai would still chase after them and come up with such a disgusting idea? And yet, none of them dared to say a single word. After all, with so many representatives present, Lin Yuan would be able to sit firmly on the fishing platform. No matter how low the price you offered was, as long as your attitude wasn't good, he would still choose not to cooperate with you. Ding Zai looked around and sneered. No one is speaking, right? Weren't you all quite talkative just now? Then I'll take the lead. Our Jianghu Association is willing to help Lord Shifter Emperor take over the entire northern frontier. The price paid in the meantime will be borne by our Jianghu Association. When Ding Zai's voice fell, everyone's face twitched crazily. The representative from Lofty Gorge Prefecture glared at Ding Zai and said coldly, Ding Zai, are you King playing with us? Ding Zai immediately shouted out everyone's bottom line. It meant that Lin Yuan didn't have to do anything, and they just had to hand over the entire northern frontier of the Jianghu dynasty to Lin Yuan. At that time, the 7 dynasties wouldn't have any attitude, let alone suppress Lin Yuan. Even if Lei Qiuxing objected, the other 6 dynasties in the Hengduan mountain range behind Lin Yuan would join forces to pressure Lei Qiuxing and force him to agree to this matter. But the problem was, if Ding Zai had shown this attitude earlier, or even offered a higher price, the Jianghu Association and Lin Yuan would have already formed a contract. How could things have developed to this point? Now that all of them had stood out, wasn't Ding Zai doing this just to disgust them? Humans were creatures that were easily swayed by emotions. This had nothing to do with cultivation. Just like how those top-notch big shots were unwilling to give up worldly power, being swayed by emotions was a bad habit that humans were born with. Unless one was an unparalleled ruthless person who was pure of heart and had no human nature at certain times, humans would definitely do something that they would regret afterwards. For example, right now, an old man with white hair and beard slowly stood up and said expressionlessly, I, the Supreme Palace, will repeat all the conditions of the Jianghu Association. After you take over the entire northern frontier, we promise not to ask for any reward for the next 10 years. When the old man finished speaking, many people's expressions changed. They thought Ding Zai was crazy just a moment ago, but now he was King killing them. Not asking for any reward for the next 10 years was equivalent to letting Lin Yuan monopolize the entire northern frontier for 10 years. With Lin Yuan's cultivation speed, even if he couldn't compare to those top bosses in 10 years, he would definitely be one of them. By then, the northern frontier of the Jianghu dynasty would be his own territory. Who would dare to ask for benefits from Lin Yuan? What was the difference between this and working for free? Oh, there was a difference. This was King working for free. Soon, another representative stood up and said in a deep voice, I will repeat all the conditions of the previous 2. Also, I will select a 3 million strong elite army from the Shuangjin dynasty under my jurisdiction to assist the Dragon King in attacking the northern frontier. Everyone's faces twitched crazily again. Great, they're starting to act now? Just to disgust others, each one was more shameless than the other. Working for free? Paying to work for free? Now there's even paying to work for free. Chapter 463. Everyone's gaze paused on this representative for a moment, especially Ding Zai. His gaze was incomparably complicated. Behind the representatives of these forces are all the top forces that are detached from the world. As long as it does not involve survival, even the 7 great empires have to obey their orders. However, when he had a falling out with Lin Yuan, the representatives of these forces were like dogs that saw a bone and directly surrounded him. Obviously, they were all like him. When they came out from their families, they also received an errand. Even if Ding Zai could reach an agreement with Lin Yuan, these people would obstruct him and make Ding Zai lose trust in front of Lin Yuan. Ding Zai proposed this plan because he wanted to show his bottom line. Even if he couldn't obtain the right to cooperate, he could disgust these flies. After all, although the Xianglu Association wasn't considered a large organization, it wasn't the worst among the top forces. Therefore, the bottom line that Ding Zai could offer was already a price that most of the forces present couldn't bear. So what if there were more powerful forces than the Xianglu Association? In the end, they were just running errands and not the ones in charge. After paying such a huge price to complete this task, the higher-ups naturally didn't have a good impression of them. In fact, the northern frontier was not much different from a chicken rib in their eyes. Therefore, even if these people facilitated this matter, they themselves wouldn't be able to obtain any benefits from it. It would be considered good if they weren't punished. This could be considered Ding Zai's small revenge, and it was also a small thought. Although he did not succeed in this task, the person who took over the task could be considered to have suffered in silence. This way, although he would still be punished when he returned to the Xianglu Association, he would not be sentenced to death. Do you all have nothing better to do? A burly man with a red face crossed his arms in front of his chest and said in a low muffled voice, "What are you all shouting for? Think about the conditions that you all offered and see if you can do it before you speak. Since you've been discussed by Ding Zai, you all should discuss the other competitors. I want to see if no one continues to shout and the task is in your hands. How are you going to explain it when you go back?" The burly man's words were like thunder to the ears, immediately suppressing the group of representatives who were arguing fiercely. To put it bluntly, because Ding Zai had made a good start, the price they called out later was already lower than their bottom line. If it wasn't for the fact that some people were still shouting out in disgust, the crowd would have long been silent. After all, it was one thing to say it verbally, but being able to do it was another thing. Deceive Lin Yuan? What a joke. Did he think that the current Lin Yuan was still a cat or a dog that could be bullied by anyone? In a year and a half, he had gone from a wild beast to a mountain lord. There had not been many people with this kind of cultivation talent since the primordial age. Almost all of them had reincarnated mighty figures. Although the various clans had no way of investigating Lin Yuan's origins, just based on the banner of his demon court, these existences, who were the current top forces, knew that as long as Lin Yuan did not die prematurely, there would be a day when he would stand shoulder to shoulder with the big shots behind them. At that time, if Lin Yuan held a grudge in his heart, what was the difference between crushing wage earners like them to death as if they were bugs? Lin Yuan immediately became the focus of everyone's attention. After pondering for a moment, he said with a smile, "Let's just treat what happened before as a small episode to lighten the atmosphere. You've all calmed down now, right? Why don't we make a new offer?" The representatives of the various forces all nodded in agreement. After all, they had already called out the price before. Lin Yuan would stay at the northern frontier and not move, and they would personally lead the troops to conquer the north of the Shenwu dynasty. Then they would divide the Shenwu dynasty into two parts and let Lin Yuan become the guardian of the 8th dynasty. They would also allow him to freely overthrow the so-called emperor of the 8th dynasty. Moreover, they also promised that they would not give Lin Yuan any benefits in the next 50 years. This condition was actually a dream come true. If there was such a good deal, why would Ding Zai fall out with Lin Yuan just because of some gains and losses? Of course, the main reason why the burly man spoke was because he couldn't continue with this. Not to mention that these conditions were impossible to fulfill. Even if there were any forces that were willing to do it, they wouldn't work for Lin Yuan for free. If Lin Yuan did not tactfully open his mouth to agree, although the other party would also pinch his nose and carry out the plan in accordance with the contract, there would be an unsolvable grudge between the two sides, and no one would be able to live a peaceful life in the future. Therefore, when the burly man spoke, Lin Yuan took the initiative to step down from the stage given by the other party. It could be considered as giving the representatives of these forces a chance to think calmly. Because Ding Zai had already called out a price before, his goal could be considered to have been achieved. Naturally, he wouldn't open his mouth to offend the representatives of these forces. Instead, he obediently stood at the back, waiting for the battle of words to start. Without Ding Zai taking the lead, the representatives of the other forces also started to whisper. After all, everyone knew that as long as the first person to speak was able to lower the price enough, the chances of a deal being struck would be very high. However, if they did that, not only would their own benefits be reduced, they would also offend the other forces who had come from afar. Although there was only one northern frontier, how many opportunities were there in the Jianghu continent? Although people who did things to the extreme could be happy for a moment, but if they were to encounter a similar situation in the future, who would give them face? Lord Dragon King, my family is willing to step forward and let the Xinwu dynasty repair the relationship between you and them, and let them promise to hand over the legal rights of the northern frontier to you. At that time, however much you can eat will be yours. Be it the Xinwu dynasty or the other 6 great empires, they will definitely not find trouble with you. According to the usual practice, 40% of the territory's income will be handed over to us to be divided equally. If Lord Dragon King agrees, my family will take 15%. A slightly weaker force's representative took the initiative to speak. He had never thought of forming a contract with Lin Yuan under the watchful eyes of a pack of wolves. However, it was not right to flick his sleeves and leave, and it was also not right to stay here and waste time. Thus he might as well toss the bait. The conditions he offered were not high, but it definitely could not be said that he had lowered the price. After all, 40% of the income was originally going to be handed over to the Heavenly Gate Protector. According to the unspoken rules, the force that facilitated this matter for Lin Yuan, other than their own share, could also ask for some private goods from Lin Yuan. However, this person did not mention a single word about it. Instead, he restricted all the benefits to the items that Lin Yuan was originally going to spend on. Lord Dragon King, my family, Lord Dragon King, since someone had taken the lead and offered a reasonable price, the rest of the people did not have any qualms about speaking, and they all stood up to express their intentions. However, this time, when they opened their mouths, everyone deliberated for a moment and did not shout out hot-headedly like before. Chapter 464. 2 flowers bloomed, one on each side. Let's not talk about Lin Yuan's bidding meeting where all the heroes gathered. Then there was the situation in Taicang City. Big Brother Lin, who was standing outside the government office, looked at the gray-robed family leader with a complicated look on his face and said in a deep voice, "Brother, this government office is not easy to fight. I'm also short on manpower, so I can only give you about 100 late-stage airborne realm fighters to ease your urgency. Go to the other government offices and see if you can borrow some people from them." Without those private soldiers of the family holding back the main forces of the northern frontier, it was impossible for them to break out of the battle formation by themselves. Even if they were able to escape, there were only about a dozen Heaven Dipper realm experts. Moreover, the northern frontier was still Lin Yuan's territory. The embroidered uniform guards and the Demon Emperor would join forces to investigate. Even if they could fly, they wouldn't be able to hide for long. The granary was their only life-saving straw at the moment. Once the northern frontier fell into a food shortage, chaos would inevitably rise. At that time, the families would have a way to survive. With the food in their hands, they could make countless people of the northern frontier, who were unwilling to starve to death, put down their dignity and become their accomplices in the rebellion. No matter how good the people of the northern frontier were at fighting, could they kill all the people of the northern frontier? Then, thank you, Brother Lin. There was a smile in the gray-robed family head's voice, but the next moment, the plot was revealed. The moment he raised his head, his eyes were full of cold light. Even if Brother Lin had a warning in his heart, a short knife was accurately stabbed into his abdomen before he could withdraw and retreat. Almost at the moment when he was stabbed, Brother Lin had already begun to mobilize the spiritual qi in his body. However, the short knife was stabbed in his dantian, which was the place where the spiritual qi had to travel through the meridians in the body. Moreover, it was obvious that the short knife was dipped in poison. Once his spiritual qi passed through his dantian, it quickly melted as if it had encountered a burning ice. Coupled with the fact that his vital part was stabbed, Brother Lin instantly lost his strength and directly collapsed to the ground. What? The pale-faced elder Brother Lin stared blankly at the gray-robed family master. His eyes dimmed as he asked. There were at least 1 million private armies left behind by the various clans in the periphery. Even if the people of the northern frontier prince's mansion were extremely capable, they would not be able to take over the streets in the periphery without making any noise. Therefore, the situation was very clear. The clan heads who were in charge of the periphery had retreated under the attack of the northern frontier prince's mansion and had become traitors among them. Lin Sihai, you took care of me back then, so I'll let you die knowing the truth. Your rebellion is full of loopholes. What a joke. If the northern region lord's palace isn't strong enough to deal with the rebellion, or even be on par with us, then you can do this. But they have an overwhelming advantage in terms of military power. The 3 cities are surrounded by them. Let's not talk about helping each other. Right now, those who are in trouble are probably waiting for us to go and help them. This is considered a defeat. The so-called half a month was just your wishful thinking. In fact, the rations of the people in the northern frontier could last for at least 3 months, or even until the autumn harvest. Not to mention that the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce was connected to the 7 great empires. The moment something happened to Taitsong, the caravans had already set out to buy rations. When you woke up from your dream, the northern frontier would not be in chaos. This is a second defeat. In addition, you kept saying that it was for the benefit of the clans. Let me ask you, the small clans had already done the hard work of the cannon fodder. You guys hid in the inner city and blocked the entrance of a few government offices. You guys said that you did your best, but in the end, the benefits would definitely be taken by the big clans. You guys lost the support of the people at the beginning. This is a third defeat. Do you think that the actions of the other settlements were quickly destroyed because the forces planted there were weak? No, it's because our every move is under the control of the northern frontier. They are not afraid of us rebelling, but they are afraid that we will hide in the dark and play tricks for them. I have repeatedly advised you that this is not the time to start a rebellion, but you guys don't listen. You insist that this is the best opportunity. Now, everyone is in trouble and you dare to ask me why? It's because we want to live. Is this reason enough? The gray-robed clan leader obviously did not have much intention to save face for Lin Sihai. His face was calm, but every word was hurtful. Lin Sihai opened his mouth but was unable to utter a single word. That was because he saw hundreds of men in black, all of whom were at the advanced stage of the airborne realm, pouring out from the streets and alleys, heading straight for the government office. 1,000 words can be summed up into one sentence. You guys are not worthy of my advice. The head of the gray-robed family sneered and said in a cold voice, "You old bastards who live in the past glory, die with your own beautiful dreams and unwillingness. Don't worry, in the coming great era, I will lead the aristocratic families on the right path. Like the Qiao clan and the Shui clan, we will become the tide of the new era." Although Lin Sihai had been poisoned, he had only lost some strength. He wouldn't be able to breathe for a while. After hearing what Lin Sihai said, he couldn't help but sneer. After saying so much, it's all because you, Qin Zifang, are jealous of the Shui family's rise. In the future, the Shui family's descendants will be taken care of by the Northern Region King's mansion. Your Qin family's situation isn't even as good as the Shui family's, so of course you want to hug the Black Flood Dragon's thigh. But unfortunately, the backbone of my family has been destroyed by you. From now on, the descendants of the family under the Black Flood Dragon's rule won't have a good life. If the Northern Region King's mansion wants to control you, then even if you break the heavens, you won't be able to escape misfortune. That's not right. Qin Zifang shook his head and said indifferently, I can see the future pattern of the northern frontier, but can't you see it? It's nothing more than relying on the power of the clans, thinking that their descendants can enjoy the glory even if they are ignorant. If your Lin clan's descendants are as good as the Qiao clan's descendants, or as tough as the Shui clan's descendants, will you resist the arrival of the new era? Well said. Qin Zifang's voice fell, and he saw a Confucian scholar in a snow-white robe, with 4 golden armored guards around him. It was Li Zhong who was in charge of the new policy in the northern frontier. Li Zhong walked in front of Lin Sihai as if he was taking a stroll, and said expressionlessly, This brother is right, the days where the clans can enjoy the glory and splendor have completely come to an end. In the future, the northern frontier will be turbulent, and it will depend on your own means, and those with a little self-confidence will be waiting for the arrival of the new era. The end of the clans has come. Chapter 465. Ah. Cough. Cough. Lin Sihai stared at Li Zhong as if he had heard a joke. He suddenly looked up to the sky and laughed. As he laughed, he suddenly coughed up 2 mouthfuls of black blood. His face had turned red before he finished coughing up the poisonous blood. The 3 cities revolted and supported each other. They controlled Taitsong and waited for the chaos in the northern frontier. All the plans had failed the moment the outer defense line of Taitsong City was broken. Even if the rest of the aristocratic families in the city struggled desperately, it was only a matter of time before they died. For the Wang mansion in the northern frontier, the aristocratic family's obedience was no longer important. With the Qiao family, the Shui family, and the aristocratic families like Qin Zifang willing to join them, the northern frontier could not advance, but it could certainly maintain the current situation. In this way they could accumulate more money and grain and plan for greater reforms. As Li Zhong and Qin Zifang said, the old era was completely over. At the very least, this was the case in the northern region. At the very least, before the emergence of powerful masters like Lin Yuan and Lei Qiuxing in various aristocratic families and sects, this old era had ceased to exist. As for whether the descendants of the aristocratic families of the later generations could restore their current authority, it would take thousands of years. Anyway, these descendants of the aristocratic families had already become people waiting for death. Lin Sihai finally gasped for breath. He still had a sneer on his face and said coldly, "Qin Zifang, I'll go first. Let's see what good fate you people who are willing to be dogs will have in the future. Besides you, Li Zhong. Don't forget, before you there have been two kings of the northern frontier. How long do you think you can stay in this position? I'll go first and wait for you down there." When his voice fell, the expression on Lin Sihai's face froze. The light in his eyes became unfocused. He had actually died. "Clean up the battlefield." Li Zhong ordered the guard of the Jin family beside him. Then he walked toward the government office with a calm face. "You are Li Zhong? I heard that the Black Jiao thinks highly of you." Suddenly, a pale and almost bloodless palm gently rested on Li Zhong's shoulder. Li Zhong slowly turned his head and saw a young man with mixed black and white hair looking at him with a faint smile. Clang, clang, clang. The surrounding guards of the Jin family immediately drew out their swords and stared at this strange young man who had suddenly appeared. They actually didn't notice at all. They only saw a blur in front of their eyes, and this strange young man appeared behind Li Zhong like a ghost without a trace. This made them feel humiliated, and at the same time, they were secretly shocked by this strange young man's terrifying strength. The strange young man didn't even turn his head. He only let out a soft snort, and the four golden armored guards seemed to have lost their ability to move. At the same time, Lin Yuan also negotiated the price with the representatives of the aristocratic families. First of all, the annual output of the entire north must be handed over to the various forces guarding the gate of heaven. This was an unshakable rule. As for how this profit would be divided, it was an internal matter of these top forces. In addition, with Lin Yuan's declaration, although the north of the Xinwu dynasty still belonged to the Xinwu dynasty, it had already been promised to Lin Yuan in name. As long as Lin Yuan had the ability to take over the north, the other 6 empires would not dare to interfere. Don't underestimate this name. With the recognition of these top forces, the future battle between Lin Yuan and Lei Qiuxing would be a battle between the two empires. The winner would naturally inherit the entire Xinwu dynasty and wouldn't even need a name. The loser would lose everything. Life and death would be decided by the winner. This allowed the battle to be controlled within the scope of Lin Yuan's control. It wouldn't evolve into a chaotic battle between humans and demonic beasts for territory. After all, no matter how tough Lin Yuan's methods were before he had enough strength and power, he couldn't contend against the general trend and become an enemy of the entire human race. Although Lin Yuan didn't admit defeat, he knew very well that if he took over the northern frontier without this name, it was tantamount to stewing himself in an iron pot. Not to mention whether the humans in the northern frontier would stand on Lin Yuan's side, even if they still maintained their loyalty to Lin Yuan. Using the power of one region to contend against the entire Jianghu continent was the same as the aristocratic families in the northern frontier joining forces to challenge the prince's mansion in the northern frontier. There could only be one word to describe it: overconfidence. In addition to these basic terms, the representatives of the forces controlling the Shuangjin Empire and the Qinjiang Empire also stated that they would ask the two empires' troops to refuse to make peace with Lei Qiuxing and continue to delay the main forces of the Xinwu dynasty at the border. Although this was originally the idea of the two empires, with their affirmation, the two empires would stop at a certain point, and the top forces would agree. At least, before the battle between Lin Yuan and Lei Qiuxing at the Weishui River, Lei Qiuxing's main forces wouldn't come back to help. Because until then, Lei Qiuxing would definitely not shrink the front line to fight with Lin Yuan at the risk of the destruction of the country. Of course, since everyone had contributed to this matter, Lin Yuan naturally had to express his gratitude. Therefore, he took out an extra 10% of the profits every year and evenly distributed it to the top forces who participated in this matter. This made the representatives of the forces whose dynasties were not bordering the Xinwu dynasty beat their chests and stamp their feet. The Jianghu continent was a very strange place. The structure of the forces here was different from the novels that Lin Yuan had read to pass time in his previous life. It was not like the Wuxia novels where the imperial court was formed by experts who absolutely suppressed the various sects and aristocratic families. It was also not like the Xinxia novels where a single sect ruled countless empires. The top forces on the Jianghu continent and the various empires restrained each other. For example, in terms of combat strength, the 7 empires together might not be able to defeat a top force. However, if they were really forced to a corner, the top forces would directly cut off their source of income, and everyone would perish together. Therefore, the big shots of these top forces could do a favor to Lin Yuan, but they definitely could not force the empires under their rule to directly sail to the south of the Jianghu dynasty to cooperate with Lin Yuan, because the emperor of the empires was destined to not give them face. However, to be able to negotiate to this point, Lin Yuan could already be considered to be satisfied, and would not ask for more. All the top forces had tasted the sweetness, but they could only curse in their hearts. This was because Lin Yuan's attitude was very ambiguous. He did not directly tie himself to any one of the empires, but rather made his attitude clear. Whoever cooperated with him would be able to taste the sweetness. In this way, if any of the top forces wanted to reap benefits from Lin Yuan, they would have to wear the same pants as him. No matter what Lin Yuan did, they would have to cooperate with him. If Lin Yuan could profit, they would naturally also profit. Although they would not receive the full support of a top force, they could still be considered to be well off and did not form any grudges with anyone. Furthermore, they had laid the foundation for future cooperation. Chapter 466. The 4 golden armored guards didn't even have the chance to fight back. Their vitality disappeared instantly, and they stood there like stone statues. It was only at this moment that Li Zhong's forehead was covered in a thin layer of cold sweat. He suddenly realized that this strange young man who suddenly appeared behind him was not only powerful, but also had no bad intentions. Otherwise, he wouldn't have killed the 4 golden armored guards just because they pulled out their swords. This also proved that this strange young man was temperamental and didn't like to be offended. Now that the young man's hand was on his shoulder, Li Zhong clearly realized that if his response made the young man feel uncomfortable, the young man could take his head off with a single thought. Your cultivation is outstanding in the whole Sky Martial continent. Why do you have to do such a despicable thing? Now that my life is in your hands, don't you dare to introduce yourself before you ask for my name? This is the most basic courtesy. Li Zhong thought for a while. Although he was depressed, he didn't show any sign of giving in. With the young man's cultivation, killing him was just a matter of a thought. He could even do it quietly. Now that he showed up and held him, it was obvious that he wanted to know something from him, or maybe he wanted him to tell him something. After all, he was an otaku who never went out of the northern region prince's mansion. It was impossible for him to provoke such an existence. If the aristocratic family of the northern region had such a trump card, Lin Yuan would have died before he completely took control of the northern region. After thinking for a while, Li Zhong quickly confirmed the young man's identity. He was the one behind the aristocratic family's rebellion. He was the one who gave the aristocratic families confidence that they could compete with the northern frontier aristocratic families and the Black Water Dragon Palace. Now the northern frontier aristocratic families were doomed. Even if he died, Luo Su died, and the northern battlefront army and the embroidered uniform guards were all dead. As long as Lin Yuan was still in the northern frontier, the aristocratic family's doomsday would not change. With the young man's secret plans, if the northern frontier aristocratic families weren't easy to deal with and didn't investigate carefully, the northern frontier aristocratic families might have been subverted by him. A scheming person like that wouldn't waste his time doing useless things. Introduce myself? Forget it. I don't even remember my own name. I haven't been called by anyone for hundreds of years. You should just call me Kong Lezen. A hint of loneliness appeared in the strange young man's eyes. But in an instant, he collected his emotions and said with a smile, "That Black Jiao has repeatedly ruined our plans." He even personally planned to kill the Fire Kirin, making all our plans to control the Hengduan Mountains go down the drain. We originally planned to subvert the northern frontier to repay that Black Jiao. I didn't expect you juniors would ruin our plans. Eat the king's food and be loyal to the king. We'll do our best to serve His Excellency Dragon King. Li Zhong also said with a smile, although I have never heard of the Four Alliance, those who can plot against the Hengduan Mountains are definitely not existences that I can provoke. Senior, you can kill me, but it won't benefit the overall situation. Instead, it will make you an enemy of our Dragon King. I'm not afraid of death. I'm just plotting for the sake of the Dragon King, for myself and for Senior. Senior, please put away your threats and directly tell me why you came to see me. Plotting for me? A fierce look flashed in Kong Lezen's eyes. He narrowed his eyes and said, "Do you think that Dragon King of your family wants to fight to the death or make peace with me after I've already done so much?" This sentence was a difficult question. After all, ever since Lin Yuan came into the world, he had always shown the face of a warmonger. Everyone knew that this Black Jiao was someone who was unwilling to suffer losses and would seek revenge for the smallest grievance. Judging from Kong Lezin's actions of secretly plotting to subvert the northern frontier, the enmity between him and Lin Yuan could be considered to be irreconcilable. Although Senior is secretly plotting this matter, since it hasn't been completed, it can't be mentioned in the same breath. Li Zhong straightened his clothes and removed Kong Lezin's hand from his shoulder. He turned to look at Kong Lezin and said, "So what if the world says that the Dragon King is a killing star that has descended to the mortal world? There are too many things in the mortal world. If one only speculates about everything based on hearsay, wouldn't that be the actions of a fool? If the Dragon King is really a warmongering and bloodthirsty person, then today's northern frontier should be a purgatory on earth, not a paradise on earth." Lin Yuan's actions were too many, so many that people couldn't clearly see what kind of existence he was. In the Hengduan Mountains, Lin Yuan was a different kind of demon beast. His warmongering was far greater than the majority of demon beasts, but his actions were slick and sly. He could beat the Green Marsh clan into submission, and he could also bribe the majority of demon kings to speak for him. He even opened the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce to gain a lot of benefits for himself. At the same time, he also allowed all the humans and demon beasts involved in this matter to achieve a win-win situation. To the people of the northern frontier, Lin Yuan was more like a benevolent lord. He established new laws, but he wasn't harsh. Small mistakes were punished, big mistakes were punished, but no one could say that Lin Yuan's enforcement of the law was unclear, improper, and not strict. In addition, he took the land of the northern frontier as his country, reduced the taxes of the people, and rented these fertile lands for the people to cultivate at an extremely low price. In the northern frontier prince's mansion, Lin Yuan was like an omnipresent god. It was as if everyone's thoughts were within Lin Yuan's expectations. How the various departments should cooperate, who would be responsible if something went wrong, everything was well organized by Lin Yuan. For those who had disloyal thoughts, even if they didn't reveal the slightest abnormality on their faces, they would still be beaten by Lin Yuan, making them not dare to challenge his authority. He also made use of the differences between the various factions to control them, making them hostile and divided, but at the same time, they could wholeheartedly work for the prince's mansion in the northern frontier. In the Jianghu dynasty, Lin Yuan was like an ambitious and ruthless person. Internally, he cleaned up the aristocratic families and sects, established new laws, established academies, and carried out many reforms. Externally, he set up a new army and strictly trained them. No one knew how many cards Lin Yuan held in his hands and how big his appetite was. However, Lin Yuan's ambition to annex the Jianghu dynasty was also clear as day. Otherwise, he wouldn't have sent out troops to conquer the northern rebel army's territory before the Jianghu dynasty's decree arrived. There were too many masks, making it difficult for people to see what kind of existence Lin Yuan was. Even someone as intelligent as Li Zhong could only say that Lin Yuan was an ambitious and ruthless person who only cared about results. He didn't care about what methods you used to do things as long as you could achieve the results he wanted. In Lin Yuan's eyes, whatever hatred and strife were not worth mentioning. As long as he could achieve his goal, even if he had to drink and chat merrily with his enemies, it wouldn't be a problem. At least in Li Zhong's eyes, this was Lin Yuan's way of thinking. No one could tell what the real Lin Yuan was like. Chapter 467. It was precisely for these reasons that Li Zhong revered Lin Yuan, even more than Kong Lezin, who could take his head with a raise of his hand. Although accompanying a king was like accompanying a tiger, only an extremely complicated and ambitious person like Lin Yuan could make countless talents seek refuge with him. After all, working with a king who could understand them and fight with them with wisdom and courage was the greatest pleasure for them, who stood at the top of the human pyramid. This had always been the case since ancient times. Only the founding emperors would gather around those mediocre lords who only knew how to protect their country. Even though their abilities were similar, their mentality was completely different. After gaining power, they would naturally treat the country differently from the people. Oh, everyone says that you, Li Zhong, are extremely intelligent. I would like to hear what you have to teach me. Kong Lezin seemed to be suddenly interested as he looked at Li Zhong with a burning gaze. It was unknown whether he was serious or joking. At this moment, Kong Lezin no longer had the killing intent from before, which made Li Zhong more and more certain that this person was temperamental. Although I have not heard of the 4 allied groups that Senior mentioned, with Senior's cultivation and temperament, they must be one of the top forces. Just this point alone, Senior and my Dragon King have a lot to talk about. There is no need to see each other as enemies. Previously, when Senior mentioned the Fire Kirin and the Hengduan Mountains, I speculated that Senior or the force behind Senior needs the power of the Hengduan Mountains or something in the Hengduan Mountains. To achieve this, in addition to directly controlling the Hengduan Mountains, you can also indirectly control the Hengduan Mountains. Although my Dragon King is not a human, since he was in power in the northern frontier, he could make the human and demon races live in peace. Whether it was the Hengduan Mountains or the 7 dynasties, they all recognized the Dragon King's ruling power in the northern frontier. Although on the human side the Dragon King had a bad reputation in the Hengduan Mountains, the Dragon King was an existence that opened up new territory. Now that the Beast Lord Kirin was old, it was time for the Beast King to change positions. If Senior is willing to help my Dragon King ascend to the position of the Beast Master, with the existence of the incense burning in the incense, would the Dragon King be able to disgrace Senior in return for what Senior wants? Although I did not personally witness the Fire Kirin's chaos in the Hengduan Mountains, every time I heard about it, my heart palpitated. The Fire Kirin was originally not favored by the Hengduan Mountains' demon beasts. Even if it forcefully fought for the position of Beast Lord, it would inevitably fail. After all, other than the Beast Lord, there were 3 other great Beast Kings in the Hengduan Mountains, as well as a group of desolate Demon Realm Beast Kings eyeing it covetously. I thought that the Fire Kirin's failure was inevitable. It was the first time and it would be the same for the next few times. If Senior still wants to control the Hengduan Mountains, it would be better to turn direct to indirect. Li Zhong spoke while wiping the cold sweat on his forehead. Although his fear of Kong Lezin had gradually faded, when it came to such a big matter, a scheming person like Kong Lezin would definitely think about it several times. In addition, this person was temperamental. If he felt that Li Zhong was scheming against him, even the gods wouldn't be able to save him. Although he was afraid, Li Zhong still expressed his opinion. Turn direct to indirect? Interesting. Kong Lezin stretched out his hand and pointed at Li Zhong twice and laughed. It seems that the rumors are true. You do have some skills. But the problem is that this seat and the 4 united group are unable to intervene in the matters of the Hengduan Mountains. Otherwise the Fire Kirin would not have failed. After all, that would have broken the unspoken rules of the Sky Martial Continent. Otherwise, when this seat had just arrived at the northern frontier, your Dragon King would have already died. At this point, Kong Lezin pondered for a moment before gently shaking his head with a smile. Furthermore, if that happens, the demonic beasts and humans will start a war. Although I'm not afraid of infamy, I can't do something that will shake the foundation of the Sky Martial Continent. At this moment, Kong Lezin no longer cared about Li Zhong pushing his hand off his shoulder. After all, he came to the northern frontier this time for a vacation, and also because of the death of the Fire Kirin, causing the 4 united group to completely lose the hope of controlling the Hengduan Mountains. But if he could indirectly control the Hengduan Mountains through Lin Yuan, not only would the 4 united group not have any objections, but they would also fully support Lin Yuan. After all, this Dragon King who oversaw the northern frontier was much stronger than those fellows in the Hengduan Mountains who were loyal to the monster beast imperial court. At least he would not refuse any beneficial cooperation. As long as the 4 united group could afford the price and shoulder the responsibility, after Lin Yuan became the Beast Master, it was not impossible for him to directly dispatch the monster beasts of the Hengduan Mountains to work for the 4 united group. That's fine. Li Zhong waved his hand and said in a deep voice, Senior can't intervene in the affairs of the monster beasts, but can't you intervene in the affairs of humans? Now, although my family's Dragon King is not the most powerful candidate for the position of Beast Master, the great merit of expanding the territory has fallen on him. Those great Beast Kings naturally won't ignore the Dragon King. Otherwise, once Lord Dragon King leads the northern frontier to leave the Hengduan Mountains, even if the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce can't continue, they will be reduced to the situation of being trampled on by others. As the saying goes, it's easy to go from frugality to extravagance, but difficult to go from extravagance to frugality. They are already used to the existence of the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce that can provide them with benefits and convenience, so they will never give it up so easily. Kong Lezin pondered for a moment and his mind quickly turned. The existence of the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce was not as simple as just earning benefits for Lin Yuan. Whether it was Xinwu Kingdom or the Hengduan Mountains, in fact, they were already inseparable from the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce. Those who said that the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce was not good were mostly from aristocratic families and nobles. Because Lin Yuan showed his cards, the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce could give benefits, but would not give the control to anyone. Therefore they said that the grapes were sour because they couldn't eat them. In fact, the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce's move was called moistening things silently. Whether it was the Xinwu dynasty or the Hengduan Mountains before making a move against Lin Yuan, they would have to consider how difficult their lives would be without the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce. This move not only increased Lin Yuan's influence, but more importantly, as long as Lin Yuan delivered benefits on time, no one would dare to easily provoke him. When they fell out, it meant that Lin Yuan was completely prepared to wrestle with anyone. Amazing. Apart from this, Kong Lezin could not think of any other adjectives that could be used to evaluate Lin Yuan's move. What this student means is that the Dragon King now controls the northern frontier and has considerable influence in the Hengduan Mountains. If Senior can work from this aspect and give the Dragon King more convenience, the Dragon King will have a greater chance of competing for the position of the Beast Master. He will also remember Senior's good deeds. The corners of Li Zhong's mouth rose slightly, and his forehead finally stopped sweating. This was because he could see that Kong Lezin was thinking. And thinking meant that he was moved. Chapter 468. In fact, at this moment, Kong Lezin's heart was indeed greatly moved. The Hengduan mountain range had always been outside the Seven Empires, especially in the past 1,000 years. The strongest person in the Hengduan mountain range was only the Beast Lord Kirin, who had walked a little further in the desolate demon realm. However, so what if the current Beast Lord Kirin was unfathomable in the eyes of the desolate demon realm? What it lacked from the next realm was not cultivation or aptitude, but a door that it could not enter without guidance. This was also the reason why the Beast Lord Kirin had been famous for so many years but had never been chosen by the top bosses above. This was because no matter how powerful the Beast Lord Kirin and Lei Qiuxing were, they were only at the peak of the mortal world. They were still a door that they could not cross on their own to become a true cultivator. Although the top forces and these mortal world forces were partners, those bosses did not take these existences who controlled the power of the mortal world seriously. Only Lin Yuan could be considered an accident. This was because when Lin Yuan was born, he had created the image of himself as the reincarnation of an ancient mighty figure. Even the casually fabricated demon court did exist. Moreover, the demon court at its peak was an existence that these top forces had to look up to. Coupled with the various miracles that Lin Yuan had created, the identity of the reincarnation of a mighty figure of the demon court was firmly fastened on Lin Yuan. It was laughable to say that he was the only one who did not believe that Lin Yuan was the reincarnation of a mighty figure of the demon court. It was also because of the existence of these identities that no one had ever doubted that Lin Yuan could become an existence at the same level as the leaders of the top forces in the future. It was not impossible for him to even recreate the demon court. Logically speaking, the guardians of the Heaven's Gate, who were mostly humans, should not have allowed an existence like Lin Yuan to grow. However, the enemy outside the Heaven's Gate was too powerful. It was so powerful that the top experts of this world could only hide behind the Heaven's Gate day and night and struggle at death's door. In accordance with the principle of uniting all forces, although these bosses would not promote Lin Yuan without principles, they would definitely not suppress Lin Yuan for their own selfish interests. After all, sharing the fruits was the privilege of the winner, and the loser could not even eat the leftovers. No one would attack a comrade who could grow. Even if they wanted to attack, it would be after the threat outside the Heaven's Gate was eradicated. This was the reason why the top forces were competing to show goodwill to Lin Yuan. What do you mean? Kong Lezin thought for a moment, he closed his eyes and sneered. It seems that all of us have underestimated the ambition of this Black Jiao. Senior, what do you mean? Li Zhong's expression changed several times and he carefully probed. From the initial shock and hesitation to the current joy, Li Zhong did not even pretend on the surface. He was not worried that Kong Lezin would take the opportunity to raise his conditions, because only with conditions could he bargain. If Kong Lezin directly killed him or turned around and left without saying a word, it meant that not only would they not be able to obtain any help, they would even have to add another powerful enemy. Kong Lezin pondered for a moment, then gently shook his head and said in a deep voice, "It seems that you don't know much about the Black Jiao. What I can tell you is that the vice president of the Demon Emperor Association, Ding Zai, came from the Upper Deer Association, which is a force not inferior to our Four United Group. The Black Jiao should already know his identity, so your plan is already behind the Black Jiao. This? Li Zhong looked at Kong Lezun blankly. Lin Yuan knew about all the movements in the northern frontier, but as the king of the northern frontier, he was also within the scope of supervision. No one dared to challenge Lin Yuan's authority, so Lin Yuan would either not do anything, or if he wanted to do something, he would have already prepared the overall plan. When it was time to take action, he would tell them part of the plan, and then adjust according to the direction of the matter. Li Zhong could guess Lin Yuan's ambition. This was because apart from Lin Yuan, Li Zhong was the clearest about the northern frontier's current situation. The seemingly great momentum of the northern frontier was actually unable to make ends meet. This was because any market was saturated. Even if Lin Yuan could extract all the feis in the Hengduan mountain range, it would be useless. This was because the 7 dynasty sects, clans and itinerant cultivators did not have enough purchasing power. The current Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce could barely maintain its operations, but it was definitely impossible to take out a large amount of money and food to invest in the development of the northern frontier. In such a difficult situation, one could choose to keep the peace and turn a blind eye to all the hidden dangers around them. After accumulating enough money and food to support the development of the northern frontier, they would settle the score with these people once and for all. However, this was the way to preserve one's achievements. It wasn't suitable for Lin Yuan, who was eager to forge ahead, and it wasn't suitable for the northern frontier, which was crying piteously for food. This was because no one knew how long the Jianghu dynasty's chaos would last. Once the internal strife was quelled and the external enemies retreated, even if Lin Yuan could still maintain his current status and authority, those clans and sects would definitely do their best to kill the northern frontier's reform before it was even born. Therefore Lin Yuan couldn't wait any longer. He had to complete the reform of the entire northern frontier as soon as possible and protect his foundation. Only then would he be able to make all those scheming in the dark helpless. Therefore Lin Yuan's only choice was to expand his territory. Of course, the territory wasn't the most important because all the benefits brought by the territory were long-term and continuous. Therefore, when Lin Yuan dispatched the southern expedition, the butcher's knife was actually aimed at those clans and sects in the north. The wealth that these people had accumulated over the years was rather considerable. If he wanted to quickly complete the reform of the northern frontier and spread it to the entire north and even the Jianghu dynasty, Lin Yuan could only kill the goose that laid the golden eggs and devour the accumulated foundation of these factions. SSS. Li Zhong suddenly sucked in a cold breath. Kong Lezun looked at Li Zhong with great interest and said with a smile, "The situation of the northern frontier can be hidden from many people, but those who really stand at the top will not be blinded by a single leaf. For example, although the northern frontier isn't full of brilliant generals, there are still many capable generals." It chose to send Li Zhongxing to conquer the north not because Li Zhongxing is the strongest, but because he is the most suitable for this task. Saying this, Kong Lezun paused for a moment. Then he continued, Li Zhongxing was trained with the treatment of a high-ranking military officer. What was the concept of a senior officer of Shen Linjun's military in the Jianghu dynasty? Any one of them would be qualified and capable to hold the commander's seal if they were assigned to a local army. Especially after the baptism of war, Li Zhongxing's growth speed was far beyond everyone's expectations. Even Li Zhongxing's mentor Luo Su fell to the point where he could only be on the same level as Zhang Qilin. However, Li Zhongxing became the commander of the southern expedition. Chapter 469. Killing people and destroying their hearts. These 4 words were too appropriate for Lin Yuan's actions. Because Shen Linjun's high-ranking officers had been brainwashed from a young age, loyalty to Lei Qiuxing was their life's creed. Even if Lei Qiuxing wanted them to kill their entire family, they wouldn't even frown. Thus, no one would think that Li Zhongxing would completely abandon his loyalty to Lei Qiuxing after only serving Lin Yuan for a short period of time. As long as Lei Qiuxing sent out a secret decree, Li Zhongxing would immediately raise his butcher's knife and lay his hands on the northern aristocratic families and sects. Li Zhongxing could predict that Li Zhongxing would definitely receive Lei Qiuxing's secret decree. This was because from Lei Qiuxing's ambiguous attitude toward the northern frontier, it could be seen that Lei Qiuxing wanted nothing more than to tear Lin Yuan apart with his bare hands. However, he had no choice but to secretly support Lin Yuan's plan to reform the northern frontier. This was because once the northern frontier was reformed, it was bound to soar. At that time, Lei Qiuxing would be able to take Lin Yuan's methods and make some slight modifications before putting them into use. At that time Lin Yuan would be the scapegoat, while Lei Qiuxing would be able to complete the cleansing of the aristocratic families, sects, and even the entire imperial court, regaining all authority in his own hands. As for the revolutionaries? Only those who had revolutionized and become emperors had the right to live. Otherwise all revolutionaries would not have a good ending. However, since Lin Yuan could predict Lei Qiuxing's and Li Zhongxing's reactions and still sent out Li Zhongxing to lead the crusade against the north, this meant that Lin Yuan was at least 80% certain that the benefits of the crusade against the aristocratic families of the northern frontier would fall into his hands. The only price he would have to pay was the ridicule of the world and the infamy that would be recorded in the history books. But would Lin Yuan care about something like reputation? As a results-oriented person, as long as Lin Yuan could achieve his goal, it was reasonable for him to use any means. He would not lose a single piece of flesh even if he was scolded for a lifetime. In any case, in this world there were only a handful of people who could judge Lin Yuan, but they were definitely rare. Yet these people's attitudes towards Lin Yuan were quite friendly. It's truly terrifying. Li Zhong shook his head with a wry smile and commented in a low voice. Future generations will naturally judge Black Jiao's methods. What you and I say doesn't count. Kang Lezin looked at Li Zhong playfully and said with a smile, "What you want to say to me, Black Jiao may have already told Ding Zai." Even if the force that supported Lin Yuan and helped him annex the territory wasn't Shanglu Association, it wouldn't be me who was slow to realize it. Do you think that I, who tried to subvert the northern frontier before and couldn't give him any actual benefits, would still be able to obtain his goodwill? Almost as soon as his voice fell, Li Zhong felt that his entire body had lost its temperature. It was as if his entire body was wrapped in a cold wind, and even a burst of pain came from the surface of his body. That's right. Judging from this situation, you really won't be able to obtain my goodwill. Suddenly Lin Yuan's voice came from afar. A moment later Lin Yuan's figure condensed out of thin air. He stood still hundreds of meters away from the two of them and quietly stared at them. Kang Lezin laughed with a strange expression on his face. With his cultivation, he could naturally see that the one hundreds of meters away was not Lin Yuan's actual body, but a projection. However, this method was not something that anyone could use. At least in the four-headed group, there was no such secret method. After all, Lin Yuan's actions meant that he was far away from Taicang City. Not only did he hear their conversation, but he could also conjure a projection that they could see with their naked eyes to communicate with them. Li Zhong was silent for a moment before he slowly raised his head and said, "I'll go clean up the battlefield." With Lin Yuan and Kang Lezin's cultivation and status, there was no place for him to give orders. He didn't even have the right to listen to their conversation. When Li Zhong disappeared from the street, Lin Yuan stared at Kang Lezin and sneered, "Logically speaking, there's no way for an existence like you to survive here. So at first I planned to keep you in the northern frontier forever, but Ding Zai stopped me." A faint smile appeared on Kang Lezin's pale face and he slowly said, "Let's not talk about the gap between our cultivation. Just the gap between the northern frontier and the four-headed group, you should be clear about it, right? In the Jianghu continent, even if you kill the royal family of the 7 great dynasties, we can laugh it off. But if you kill anyone related to the Elysium, even the gods can't save you." Interesting. Lin Yuan still stared at Kang Lezin and said word by word, "But you're tough on the outside but weak on the inside." Seeing Kang Lezin's puzzled expression, Lin Yuan slowly said, "If you're really not afraid that I'll kill you, you'll completely treat my words as fart. Unfortunately you didn't. Your threat just now, in my eyes, was more like a guilty conscience. Because you and I both know that I'll be related to the Elysium in the future. If I kill you and you kill me, it can only be regarded as an internal dispute. Otherwise, even if you were twice as bold, you wouldn't dare to come to the northern frontier to stir up trouble. So what if I'm tough on the outside but weak on the inside?" Kang Lezin frowned. "But even if it's an internal dispute, if I die, will the four-headed group let you go, and let the northern frontier go?" Lin Yuan gently shook his head and said, "In an internal dispute, the northern frontier is indeed inferior to the four-headed group, but you should know that there are people who want to help you in your hour of need. Now that I've been noticed by the Elysium Guardians, it'll be difficult for me to die even if I want to." Currently, the northern frontier was in high demand in the eyes of the 7 great empires, and the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce was a veritable gold-swallowing beast. Although the people guarding the Elysium Guardians were certain of the value of the northern frontier, with the existence of a monster like Lin Yuan, they lacked interest in the northern frontier. With Lin Yuan, the northern frontier was destined to rise and soar, and without Lin Yuan, even if the northern frontier would not become the bitter and cold place it was before, it would definitely cause conditions in all aspects to regress. Regardless of Kong Lezin's strength and aptitude, he was still a powerhouse of the four-headed group. He was a comrade to the outside world, but a strong enemy to the inside world. If the four-headed group lost Kong Lezin, who knew how many people would clap their hands and cheer, and even eagerly look forward to the four-headed group finding trouble with Lin Yuan. However, they would definitely not just stand by and watch, but instead fully support Lin Yuan, because in this way they would gain a powerful ally in the future, and could also weaken the four-headed group, which was also a top force, so why not? It was precisely because he considered this point that Kong Lezin acted tough on the outside but weak on the inside. Because, if Lin Yuan really had that ability, killing him would be equivalent to killing him for nothing. Let's not talk about this anymore, back to the topic at hand. Lin Yuan's gaze paused on Kong Lezin's strange expression for a moment, and suddenly laughed. Chapter 470. Today's situation on the northern frontier is both a blessing and a curse. If I can successfully complete this revolution and start a new era, as those people said, in less than 10 years, no one in the world will be able to shake my position, and no force will have the ability to challenge the northern frontier. So here comes the problem, because what I lack the most now is time. What makes the northern frontier grow stronger is the chaos of the Shenwu dynasty. As long as the Qingjiang dynasty and the Shuangjian dynasty don't withdraw their troops, the rebels in the Shenwu dynasty will continue. But similarly, once the disaster at the border is solved, the entire Shenwu dynasty will become peaceful the day the army of the Shenwu dynasty returns. At that time, no one will sit and watch the northern frontier swallow up the land, absorb the wealth, and promote the revolution. So, on one hand, I have to maintain the current situation on the northern frontier, and on the other hand, I have to pray that the two dynasties won't withdraw their troops too soon. At the same time, everyone knows that the revolution on the northern frontier requires a lot of resources to maintain. For example, the academy on the northern frontier. Like other forces, the dynasties, aristocratic families, and sects can coexist. This is because they have to maintain their greatest suppression while absorbing talents from the entire country. However, it is very difficult to support the entire world with the power of one country. They can only sit and watch the aristocratic families grow stronger, and then absorb talents from the aristocratic families into the imperial court to govern the country. It is unrealistic to replace all the officials on the northern frontier with their own people, because the northern frontier alone can't support so many people. Kong Lezin, what do you think this king should do now? Lin Yuan's lips curled up slightly as if he was smiling, but there was no smile in his eyes. Stay in the north like a tiger and swallow the aristocratic families like a whale. Only by using the power of the aristocratic families can he grow and strengthen quickly. At least, before the dust settles, he has to have the ability to compete with the big and small forces of the Shenwu dynasty. Kong Lezin thought for a moment and smiled. Although I haven't contacted my superiors for a long time, Ding Zai's identity is not a secret. With him by your side, I think the reason for you to swallow up the north should be solved, right? I can't help you with this matter. Those who were able to cultivate to the peak of their time were naturally not the kind of existences who only focused on cultivation and closed themselves to death. They were not average in all aspects. Not to mention that they were all geniuses who could conquer the world. After all, they had their own specializations. In this regard, Li Zhong was much stronger than Kong Lezin. It was just that these people were still able to easily conquer a region and a place. Lin Yuan analyzed the background, and Kong Lezin quickly realized that Lin Yuan was planning to use him. He just wanted to help Lin Yuan confirm that the annexation of the north of the Shenwu dynasty was a show of support. He wanted the aristocratic families to control the forces they had established. At the same time, he spoke to the other 6 great dynasties. Even if these emperors felt sympathy for him, they didn't have the guts to refute. First of all, falling out with these top forces would not end well. Today's Shenwu dynasty was the best example. It became the enemy of the entire world almost overnight. Even Lei Qiuxing, the emperor who founded the dynasty, was troubled by this, not to mention these aristocratic families who had been guarding the dynasty for dozens of generations. Once something similar happened, it would be a disaster that would destroy the country. Second of all, it was impossible for them to directly attack Lin Yuan. Even Qingjiang and Shuangjian, who were directly connected to the Shenwu dynasty, couldn't openly dispatch an army to suppress Lin Yuan. Even if they didn't have any selfish motives, Lei Qiuxing would be wary of the fact that it was easier to invite a devil in than to send him away. He wouldn't let them pass through. The only way to attack the northern frontier was through the Hengduan mountain range, which was occupied by countless monsters. How many great dynasties would waste their national strength to stand up for Lei Qiuxing? Third of all, it was easy for the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce to enter the Hengduan mountain range. Whether these great dynasties recognized it or not, with the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce, the national treasury would be much more abundant, not to mention the aristocratic families and sects that were connected to the Hengduan mountain range. After all, they didn't have an emperor like Lin Yuan who had almost destroyed all the forces under his rule. It would be more difficult to ask these greedy fellows to give up on the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce, which was a cash cow, than to ask them to die. Therefore they would not have to pay a heavy price to support Lin Yuan. They just had to say a few words to express their opinions. As for whether the emperors of the 6 great empires would listen or not, it was not in the consideration of the top forces, because it was absolutely impossible to do as Lin Yuan did in that position and act according to their own likes and dislikes. The first thing they had to think about must be the impact of this matter on the entire dynasty. Since the path of support had been taken by someone else, if they wanted to support Lin Yuan in annexing the north, they could only do their best. Even if the top forces were considered to have spread their branches and leaves in the various great dynasties, there wasn't much power that they could mobilize. Moreover, in this kind of power struggle game there could only be one winner. Even if the loser didn't die, they would be exiled to the wilderness. Now no one, including Lin Yuan, dared to say that the northern frontier would definitely be the winner who would have the last laugh. The 4 united groups' forces are in the south. With your power, it shouldn't be difficult to control the Ether Society, right? Lin Yuan glanced at Kong Lezun with some surprise and began to plan silently in his heart. He had heard the entire conversation between Kong Lezun and Li Zhong. This madman, who had the intention of subverting the entire northern frontier, had now clearly seen that Lin Yuan wasn't an existence that he could afford to offend. Although he didn't fear Lin Yuan as much as a tiger, Kong Lezun definitely wouldn't reject the opportunity to turn enemies into friends with Lin Yuan. Why did Kong Lezun reject him at this moment? However, Kong Lezun shook his head and said slowly, although the Ether Society isn't much in our eyes, their influence in the secular world isn't small. They control all the evil forces in the Shenwu dynasty, including the 72 linked villages in the north, the Chao gang in the south, and even the small salt merchants listen to their orders. However, we can use this influence, but it's unrealistic for them to be invincible against the Shenwu dynasty. The Ether Society has a round table of 13 people. In name they're evenly matched, but in reality only the president has the final say. Speaking up to this point, Kong Lezun paused and said with a playful gaze, "This president is Zhang Xiu." There was no need for Kong Lezun to say the rest. After all, Zhang Xiu was the head of the secret service of the Shenwu dynasty. Regardless of whether he was loyal to Lei Qiuxing or not, or whether he had his own plans, he would definitely not make any mistakes in principle. It would be more difficult for his subordinates to stir up a storm in the south than directly entering the imperial capital and capturing Lei Qiuxing alive. Chapter 471. Is it possible to change the Grand President of the Ether Association? A murderous intent flashed in Lin Yuan's eyes. Kong Lezun shook his head and sneered, "Lei Qiuxing is not a muddle-headed person. Do you think that if it were you, and the Demonic Emperor Association could not guarantee their loyalty to you, you would tolerate the Demonic Emperor Association taking root in the northern frontier?" Lin Yuan smiled bitterly to himself, but shook his head honestly. If the Grand President of the Ether Association was not Zhang Xiu, but a force formed by a group of ruffians, then with Lei Qiuxing's stubborn and suspicious character, he would definitely not tolerate the Ether Association taking root in the Shenwu dynasty. Furthermore, even if the degree of the evil forces in the dynasty was not as good as the Ether Associations, with enough equipment, they would be able to stand on equal footing with the various garrisons. It was the same for the Demonic Emperor Association in the northern frontier. It was because they maintained their loyalty to Lin Yuan, and because they were watched by people like Shi Dong and Luo Su, that the Demonic Emperor Association could become the leader of the underground forces in the northern frontier. If not for this, when an existence like the Demonic Emperor Association emerged, Lin Yuan would have cut them off with a single slash. Then, what about the evil sect members? Lin Yuan pondered for a moment, then suddenly asked. Kong Lezun choked and his expression changed. He said in a daze, You should be clear that those evil sect members are lunatics with problems in their heads. Cooperating with them is no different from asking a tiger for its skin. In order to cause chaos in the south of the Jianghu dynasty, are you sure you want to bring back those evil sect members who have been exiled long ago from the isolated islands overseas? If they can't be dealt with, how will you deal with them? Although they knew that Lin Yuan had always been unscrupulous in his actions, no matter who it was, they would have a great resistance against the evil sect members. This was especially true for the forces guarding the Heavenly Gate. They could be said to be sworn enemies with the evil cult. After all, the indescribable existences that these lunatics with abnormal minds believed in were all famous existences when the Heavenly Gate opened and countless foreign monsters attacked the Jianghu continent. It was precisely because of the existence of these evil cultists that the fellows on the other side of the Heavenly Gate were able to keep a close eye on the Jianghu continent. It was not the first time that they had eliminated the evil cultists. However, the evil cultists were like rats. When disaster struck, they would find a hole to hide in and wait for the limelight to pass before coming out to wreak havoc. After several elimination operations, although the results were not small, the evil cultists had grown stronger. If we want to kill all the rats, we have to lure them out of the cave. Lin Yuan's heterochromatic eyes flashed with a strange light as he sneered. These evil cultists have been causing trouble for many years. No matter who is in power, they will have to purge them. However, the law of heaven is clear and it is the cycle of karma. It should be their good fortune to be able to contribute to the people of the world before they die. Hearing this, Kong Lezin shuddered again. He originally thought that he had seen through Lin Yuan thoroughly enough, but he did not expect that he had still underestimated Lin Yuan's ambition. The mere north could not satisfy Lin Yuan's appetite. Now, Lin Yuan wanted to use the fertile land of the north to support the northern frontier. When the climate of the northern frontier was slowly radiating and changing the north, when everything was ready, Lin Yuan could send his troops to the south at any time and swallow the entire Jianghu dynasty into his stomach. In this way, when Lin Yuan finished eating the Jianghu dynasty, wouldn't the other 6 great empires be unable to escape destruction? No wonder, this Black Jiao wanted the north. If what he wanted was the entire Jianghu dynasty, then the other 6 great empires were bound to discover Lin Yuan's ambition and oppose it with all their might. However, as long as Lin Yuan wanted the north, the other 6 great empires would give face to those top forces. The only one in a difficult position was the Jianghu dynasty. At that time, under the instigation of those aristocratic families and sects, the Jianghu dynasty and the northern frontier were bound to have a war. At that time, even if Lin Yuan ate the entire Jianghu dynasty, no one could say anything about Lin Yuan. After all, Lin Yuan was fighting back after being beaten. However, Lin Yuan had already said so. Even Kong Lezin had to think twice. If he did not tie himself to Lin Yuan, would Lin Yuan let him leave safely? It won't work. I don't have a channel to contact those evil cult members. Kong Lezin shook his head again and said in a deep voice, "Since you are the successor of the demon court, you should know that the guardians of the Heavenly Gate and those evil cult members can be said to be irreconcilable. As long as we catch their members or strongholds, the first reaction is to give them a destructive blow. It is also because of this strategy that we slowly peel back the silk from the cocoon and suppress the evil cult members from all over the world to an isolated island overseas to struggle at death's door. If we lure them back and something big happens, I'm afraid no one will be able to bear it." Kong Lezin was telling the truth this time, but his tone was undoubtedly a lot more relaxed. The meaning was very clear. If the Black Jiao could contact those evil cult members and had the ability to lead them to the Jianghu continent, then the 4 united group could turn a blind eye and let these evil cult members wreak havoc in the south. However, the prerequisite was that Lin Yuan had to come up with a comprehensive plan to ensure that he had enough ability and sincerity. After using the evil cult members, he would catch them all in one fell swoop. Rats are rats. They won't let go of the opportunity to steal fish. The corners of Lin Yuan's mouth curled up even more. He sneered and said, "As long as there is a chance to return to the Jianghu continent, they will definitely spare no effort. However, the rats will definitely not all come out of their nests at once. We have to let them taste the sweetness. When the main forces of the rats on the isolated island are transferred to the Jianghu continent, your people can cooperate with the Dragon Palace of the 4 Seas to kill all the rats left behind. As for the group on the Jianghu continent, I will deal with them cleanly." Kong Lezin closed his eyes and thought for a moment before saying in a hoarse voice, "Okay, I will go back and help you with the operation." When his voice fell, Lin Yuan's projection slowly dissipated. Persuading a person was not enough to rely on sincerity alone. Lin Yuan did not hide his hostility towards Kong Lezin from the beginning in order to make him fear him. Then he would analyze the situation on the northern frontier and tell him part of his plan. In this way, Kong Lezin would definitely consider that if he did not agree, Lin Yuan would definitely not let him leave the northern frontier safely. Under such conditions, Kong Lezin would no longer doubt that Lin Yuan did not have the ability to keep him here. Since Lin Yuan dared to tell him his plan, he was not worried that he would leak it out. In other words, if he did not agree to this matter, he would die on the northern frontier. In fact, whether Lin Yuan had the ability to kill Kong Lezin or not, perhaps only he knew. It was not an exaggeration to call this conversation a huge gamble. However, from the current situation, Lin Yuan was sure that he had won the gamble. Chapter 472. Lord Shifter Emperor, you really have good means. Ding Zai, who also saw this scene through the projection, had a look of regret on his face. In Ding Zai's view, an existence like Kong Lezin was already quite a great figure. But such a figure would also be controlled by Lin Yuan, and was dominated by Lin Yuan from the beginning to the end. Ding Zai suddenly felt that the narrow-mindedness he played before was laughable. Just as Li Zhong said, Lin Yuan's control of people's hearts had already reached the level of perfection. With such an ability, even if Lin Yuan was a trash without any cultivation, he could still sit at the top of the secular world and become one of the people at the top of the food chain. I'm just guiding the situation. Lin Yuan shook his head gently, but there was a hint of disappointment in his eyes. He originally wanted to use the hands of the Four United Group to stir up chaos in the south, but Kong Lezin rejected this matter, causing Lin Yuan to punch cotton with all his strength. If he hadn't grasped Kong Lezin's mentality and modified part of the follow-up plan, the conversation between the two was destined to end on a sour note. However, they failed to achieve their goal of having the quadripartite gang fight Lei Qiuxing personally. In exchange, they only obtained a condition that could lure the cultists to the south of Xinwu Imperial City to attack Lei Qiuxing. However, the troubles that needed to be solved did not decrease, but instead increased. Whether it was the Four United Group or other forces, it was impossible for them to sit back and watch the evil cult grow stronger in the south. Even with Lin Yuan's guarantee, after a cat saw a mouse, even if they had the intention to play, they would not hold back for long. And the most important problem was that Lin Yuan had to persuade the Dragon Palace of the Four Seas to join forces with these top forces to eliminate the evil cult. However, although most of the monsters of the Dragon Palace of the Four Seas were born and raised in the Four Seas of the Jianghu continent, it still couldn't be changed. They were a race from the other side of the Jianghu continent. It was just that they didn't have any malice towards the Jianghu continent and even provided some help, so they weren't killed or expelled. If it weren't for the two being of the same origin, the monsters of the Dragon Palace of the Four Seas wouldn't tolerate the evil cult in their territory. It was just that no one could imagine how heavy this relationship was. Whether the Dragon Palace of the Four Seas is in cahoots with the cultists or just simply cares about the feelings of fellow countrymen, these two attitudes completely represent whether Lin Yuan's plan is feasible or not. Looks like I have to make a trip to the West Sea Dragon Palace. Lin Yuan sighed silently in his heart. Back then, he had killed that old Jiao snake because he had a chance of entering the Dragon Palace of the Four Seas. That was why he had disregarded the mountain-shaking ape, the overlord of the Stoneclaw Forest, and attacked him. However, because of that Jiao snake, Ao Chen of the West Sea Dragon Palace had joined in. After thanking Lin Yuan for helping out, no other demonic beast dared to make a fuss about this matter. After all, the Dragon Palace of the West Sea didn't care about Lin Yuan killing the dragon bloodline demonic beast. Then what could they, a group of monsters that had nothing to do with the Dragon Palace of the Four Seas, join in the fun? Later, when Lin Yuan became the hot new star of the Hengduan mountain range, the Dragon Palace of the Four Seas also extended an olive branch. However, Lin Yuan casually refused and didn't intend to go to the Dragon Palace of the Four Seas. However, Ao Chen obviously didn't intend to give up just like that. Instead, she directly stayed in the northern frontier for a long time. It seemed that if Lin Yuan didn't want to go back with her, she wouldn't go back either. However, as Lin Yuan's ambition grew day by day, if they continued to ignore the Dragon Palace of the Four Seas, it would only embarrass everyone. The Jianghu continent was a circular continent. The seven empires were all connected to the Hengduan mountain range in the center. However, they were also connected to the ocean controlled by the Dragon Palace of the Four Seas. Especially for a weak existence like the Xinwu dynasty, if they wanted to trade with the other six empires, they could only trade with the Qinjiang Empire and the Shuangjin Empire. However, in that way the speed of the rise of the country's strength would obviously be slower than that of the other empires. Over time the gap between them would only become bigger and bigger. This was also the reason why Lei Qiusheng still wanted to make things convenient for Lin Yuan even though he couldn't wait to tear Lin Yuan apart. After all, the Hengduan mountain range was a trade route that connected the 7 empires. It was really important. Of course, Lin Yuan could continue to ignore the Dragon Palace of the West Sea. However, if he did that after Lin Yuan annexed the entire Shenwu dynasty, it would be too late for him to ease the relationship with the Dragon Palace of the West Sea. He could only watch as the sea monsters wreaked havoc in the south of his territory year after year, dragging down most of his troops and energy, repeating the mistake of the Wanjian Empire. But then again, even humans didn't have saints, let alone demonic beasts. Once Lin Yuan left, the Hengduan mountain range would definitely be turned upside down. First of all, the monsters who were also qualified to compete for the position of Beast Lord would not miss this good opportunity to attack Lin Yuan. They would all complain to the Monster Palace, hinting that Lin Yuan did not care about the Hengduan mountain range at all. Instead, he cared more about his own dragon bloodline. Otherwise, why would he personally go to the Dragon Palace of the 4 Seas? The current Lin Yuan's strength might not be enough, but in terms of influence and wealth, Lin Yuan was an existence comparable to the Great Beast King. Naturally, he was qualified to participate in the Monster Palace's discussions. However, during this period of time, Lin Yuan did not attend the monthly meetings of the Monster Palace. The last time he went to the Monster Palace was because the Green Swamp clan had caused a huge ruckus. He had no choice but to go and settle it. In addition, even if these monsters who were listed as candidates for the position of Beast Lord did not succeed, they could not be careless. After all, the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce brought in a large amount of income every year. This was something that the Hengduan mountain range's beast kings had witnessed with their own eyes. It was only because Lin Yuan gave them a large amount of dividends that they had no choice but to put away their greedy faces. In addition, everyone had benefited from it. If they went to provoke Lin Yuan or the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce, they would be cutting off everyone's source of income. However, with Lin Yuan's departure, it was unknown how many monsters would covet the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce. They might even join forces and ask Lin Yuan to give them a larger share of the profits, or even part of the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce's control. Although Lin Yuan could suppress these voices when he was around, once Lin Yuan left, these voices would emerge. Now that the northern frontier could not do without the blood of the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce, with Li Zhong's personality, he would definitely agree to some unreasonable demands. He would only think about how he could get back at them in the future. Who knows, maybe he would agree to some unreasonable demands. Just thinking about it made Lin Yuan feel a splitting headache. There were too many troubles. However, he had no choice but to divert a large amount of energy to deal with this matter. Chapter 473. 3 days later. The imperial capital of the Shenwu dynasty. Lei Qiusheng had a gloomy expression as he dismissed the courtiers who were waiting for his orders. Then he strode back to the imperial harem. Because he had personally smashed the imperial study into pieces, Lei Qiusheng would return to his palace after he finished his court hearings. He would wait for some of his trusted aides to report on the happenings outside the imperial capital. Your Majesty. As soon as he entered the Yangxing Palace Hall, Lei Qiusheng heard a deep voice. Just like how Lin Yuan knew how to use Luo Su to keep Shidong in check, Lei Qiusheng, as an ambitious and ruthless person, knew how to keep things in check. Even though the embroidered uniform guard was in charge on the surface and Zhang Xiu had the help of the Ether Association after he left the imperial court, this did not mean that Zhang Xiu was the only spy chief of the Shenwu dynasty. It also did not mean that he was Lei Qiusheng's only trusted aide. How is the situation in the south? As the two were too familiar with each other, Lei Qiusheng skipped the hypocritical greetings and went straight to the point. The owner of the deep voice walked out of the shadows behind the door and said expressionlessly, "It's not good. The Qingping king will not send troops to suppress the rebels in the short term. To him, even if he sweeps through the entire south, he will just return to Qingping to be a king. This is obviously not in line with his original intention of risking universal condemnation. Therefore, I guess that the Qingping king wants to wait for the rebels in the south to make a move first before he can reap the benefits." At this point, he paused with a complicated expression and said in a low voice, "In addition, according to the information provided by my spies, The Qingping king is extremely dissatisfied with the king of the northern frontier sending troops to suppress the rebels in the north. He spent a large sum of money to hire a large number of Shuangjian dynasty's Shuiliao knights. There are about 50,000 of them. They should be an established knight group. He then used his connections to send them to the northern frontier. As for what happened after that, because my spies in the northern frontier were all wiped out by the Demon Emperor Association, I have no way of knowing. Zhang Xiu might know more details, but it shouldn't be much. Under the light of the noon sun, his face was revealed without a doubt. He was 90% similar to Lei Qiuxing, except that his deep black eyes were less aggressive and more profound. His name was Shadow, and he was a war orphan adopted by Lei Qiuxing's father. His face was extremely similar to Lei Qiuxing's, and he looked more like Lei Qiuxing's biological brother than Lei Qiuxing. However, the two of them were not related by blood. Because they were worried that the Shadow would impersonate Lei Qiuxing and cause trouble in the harem, the Shadow was castrated by Lei Qiuxing's father when he was very young. However, the two of them had lived and eaten together since young, and their relationship was better than that of biological brothers. Therefore, after Lei Qiuxing ascended the throne, the Shadow naturally became the head of the eunuchs. He was in charge of the servants' administration and was responsible for Lei Qiuxing's meals and lodging in the palace. If it was not for the fact that there was no one around him that he could use, Lei Qiuxing would definitely not let the Shadow leave the palace. Due to some special reasons, the rulers of the various empires were not allowed to step over the threshold of the Heaven Star realm. For example, Lei Qiuxing ascending the throne as a Heaven Star realm cultivator was already an exception. If he were to enter the Void Star realm, the entire Shenwu dynasty would be faced with a calamity. Therefore, the Shadow was both a servant and Lei Qiuxing's strongest bodyguard. If it was not for the rise of the association of the Demon Emperor, which caused the remnants of the Jiao clan to have difficulty even lingering on at death's door, Lei Qiuxing would not have the guts to send the Shadow to the south. This was because there were too many people who wanted to kill him. Among them, there was no lack of existences in the late stage of the Heaven Star realm or even the Void Star realm. Lei Qiuxing smashed a large door made of agar wood with a punch and said fiercely, "Good, very good. It seems that this brother of mine will not tolerate me for even a day." The Shenwu dynasty had more than 10 million troops. The reason why 80% of the troops were held back by the 10 million troops of the two empires was because it was easy to defend a city, but difficult to defend a country. While ensuring that they would not be at a disadvantage on the battlefield, the Shenwu dynasty's army had to set up layers of checkpoints and strictly guard the borders, fearing that small groups of enemy troops would sneak into the country. But now, the dignified Qingping king, the Lei clan's Lei Qiuxing, who held the most authority apart from Lei Qiuxing, and even had an extremely high reputation in the army, had personally used his connections to send 50,000 Shuiliao knights into the Shenwu dynasty. It must be known that now that Shen Linjun had gone on an expedition to the south, the imperial city's defense was extremely empty. Today, Lei Qiuxing had sent these Shuangjian barbarian soldiers into the northern frontier. In the future, he would be able to send these Shuiliao barbarian soldiers to the outside of the imperial city. With the imperial guards formed by the second-generation young masters of the general family, they would probably be able to make the elite Shuiliao knights throw away their helmets and armor in a single encounter. It was fine if he didn't know about this before, but now that he knew about this matter, Lei Qiuxing felt like there was a knife hanging over his head. There were two ways to resolve this matter. The first was to investigate thoroughly and detain all the officers involved in the Shuiliao Knights' entry, then replace them with trusted aides. This was the safest method. However, as the saying went, one should not air one's dirty linen in public. Now that the Shenwu dynasty was facing internal and external threats, the Qingping king, as a descendant of the imperial family, had colluded with the enemy. Although it couldn't be said to be a traitor, it was still a great offense. In addition, the war on both sides was tense, and changing the commander at the last minute was also a great taboo for military strategists. Whether it was the former Wanjian dynasty general Lei Qiuxing or the current Shenwu dynasty emperor Lei Qiuxing, neither of them would choose this path. However, it was clearly not Lei Qiuxing's character to pretend that he didn't know about this problem. After muttering to himself for a moment, Lei Qiuxing sighed heavily and furrowed his brows. This news was most likely purposely released by Lei Qiuxing to let you know. He knew that I wouldn't settle the score now, so he could only choose the safest method to resolve this. Pass down my orders. Shen Linjun is to leave immediately and return to the imperial capital from the south. There must be no delays. But this way, the shadow's face revealed a troubled expression. He hesitated and said, "Right now, the only elite that your majesty can mobilize is Shenlin Jun. If they don't participate in the war in the south, then how the situation in the south evolves will be up to the Qingping king. Because of the chaos in the south, most places haven't even planted spring seeds. If this drags on, we won't be able to collect taxes this year and next. The expenses of other places can be reduced, but the salaries, food and pensions of the soldiers on the front lines can't be paid by the palace treasury and national treasury. The taxes in the south took up 70% of the Xinwu dynasty's revenue. If this revenue couldn't be put into the treasury, just dragging it out would be enough to drag the Xinwu dynasty to death. Because they really couldn't take out much money in food, Lei Qiuxing had no choice but to compromise. He first recruited the two biggest rebel leaders in the north and south to suppress the other rebels. The goal was to quickly end the internal conflict and return everything to the right track. Chapter 474. This lonely one naturally has a way to deal with this. Go and pass down the order. Lei Qiuxing naturally didn't have many taboos towards this brother who had grown up with him. Even if the shadow's words were overstepping his bounds, Lei Qiuxing didn't have any intention of blaming him. In their hearts they were the same person. As long as the shadow existed, Lei Qiuxing could do many things that he couldn't do but wanted to do. Lei Qiuxing bitterly laughed as he thought of this. He muttered, "But this way that Black Jiao will benefit from it. If it can help this lonely one pass this trial, then we'll still have a chance to fight. But if it can't pass this trial, then we'll all be finished together." The shadow clearly saw a trace of ruthlessness in Lei Qiuxing's eyes as he spoke. The shadow quickly connected the dots to the Black Jiao on the northern frontier. What kind of help could the Xinwu dynasty bring to the Xinwu dynasty, and what kind of disastrous rewards the Xinwu dynasty would have to pay? Yes. The shadow bowed and withdrew. At the same time he reached out and imprinted a metal mask on his face. Because Shadow's appearance resembled that of an emperor, he would only reveal his true face in front of Lei Qiuxing. Normally he would show his face in front of others with this iron mask, so he was also called Eunuch Tai by others. In the tiny land of the imperial city, those important ministers of the imperial court dared to offend Lei Qiuxing on the grounds of loyalty, but there was absolutely no one who dared to provoke this Eunuch Tai whose shadow loomed over the entire imperial city. After the shadow left, Zhang Xiu walked in confidently from outside. As one of Lei Qiuxing's trusted aides, Zhang Xiu knew many of Lei Qiuxing's secrets. However, he also knew Lei Qiuxing's absolute taboos. For example, if Zhang Xiu came to report on his work when he met with the shadow, he had the right to stand outside and listen in. However, he absolutely couldn't take a single step in. If he saw the shadow's face, then he wouldn't be able to escape death. At least 4 masters of the embroidered uniform guard had died because of their arrogance and disregard for the taboo of Lei Qiuxing. As one of the most intelligent people in the world, Zhang Xiu naturally would not violate this taboo. Since you've heard it, I don't have to waste my breath. Write the decree and have Li Zhongxing make his move now. When Lei Qiuxing's voice fell, it was as if he had aged 10 years in the blink of an eye. His entire spirit seemed to have weakened. He knew that his decree would be perfectly carried out by Li Zhongxing, and he also knew that the Black Jiao, whom he viewed as a formidable opponent, had long since planted countless backups around Li Zhongxing. If he wrote the decree for Li Zhongxing to make his move against the northern noble families, then all of the benefits would be swallowed up by the Black Jiao. At the same time, he would announce to the entire north that no one could stop the Black Jiao's edge. Once the Black Jiao swallowed up the northern territory, the next step would be to dominate the Wei River and rule across the river from him. Who would have the last laugh would depend entirely on luck and skill. Zhang Xiu gave a slight nod and did not say anything else. Instead, he quickly walked to Lei Qiuxing's desk and began to write at a rapid pace. Lei Qiuxing would never touch imperial edicts. Once Zhang Xiu finished writing the decree, he would give it a cursory look and then directly stamp it with his personal seal before sending it out. If these edicts were intercepted by others or caused irreparable consequences, then it would naturally be Zhang Xiu stealing the imperial seal and sending out fake edicts. In any case, the fire would not burn him. Lei Qiuxing leaned against the door frame and stared in a daze at Zhang Xiu, who was writing at a rapid pace. He softly said, "You and I are lord and subject and also close friends. Tell me, is this humble one's actions saving the country or destroying it?" Zhang Xiu stopped writing and thought for a moment before slowly saying, "Your Majesty, what do you think of the Black Jiao? Formidable opponent, national scholar, virtuous talent, ambitious and ruthless." Lei Qiuxing gave out one title after another almost without hesitation. Then he sighed and said, "Unfortunately he is a monster. If he was a human, even if I had to rule the country with him, I would take him under my wing." "What about the Azure Crown Prince?" Zhang Xiu asked again. Lei Qiuxing pondered for a moment before replying, "Indecisive, only caring about immediate benefits. To think that I thought he was a talent that could be molded. However, after all these years, not only did he not improve, he has even fallen. If he has the last laugh, my Xinwu dynasty will definitely fall in his hands." Zhang Xiu slowly raised his head and stared at Lei Qiuxing. He smiled and said, "Your Majesty's merits are unparalleled. Even if you are not an emperor throughout the ages, you can still be considered a rare wise ruler. Otherwise, you would not have cleaned up the mess left behind by the cursed Star Sea into today's peaceful and prosperous world. However, I have a few words that I have to say." As his voice faded, Zhang Xiu said word by word, "Now that the Black Jiao has matured, even if your Majesty fights with it, you only have a 50% chance of winning. If Lei Qiuming is in this position, my Xinwu dynasty from the king to the commoners, will all become bones in the grave. Your Majesty, please do not care about personal feelings and face. You must not leave any hope for the Azure Crown Prince." Zhang Xiu's words were like 5 bolts of lightning. Lei Qiuxing was instantly stunned. Just as Zhang Xiu said, even if he fought with the Black Jiao, he only had a 50% chance of winning. If the chaos in the south was not quelled, the Black Jiao's actions would become even more unscrupulous. It could even directly cut off the annual tribute. As the saying goes, an emperor does not lack hungry soldiers. If he did not have the money and rations in his hands, he would naturally be embarrassed to command the various armies. The scales of victory were slowly tilting towards the Black Jiao. It might not even have a 50% chance of winning. Therefore, the chaos in the south must be quelled, and it must be done swiftly and without leaving behind any future troubles. Otherwise, Lei Qiuxing would lose the bargaining chip to contend against Lin Yuan. Lei Qiuming must die. Lei Qiuxing raised his head and stared at the sky. After a while, he said this with some difficulty. Lei Qiuxing was indeed a tyrannical ruler who could not tolerate sand in his eyes. However, he also had a lot of feelings for his family. Otherwise, he could even banish Yan Xingqi. However, he was exceptionally lenient towards Lei Qiuming, who also had an extremely high prestige in the army and had great potential. He even conferred him to Green Peng, which was also far away from the imperial capital. Different from Yan Xingqi, conferring the title of Green Peng King was not a banishment. It was because Green Peng Mountain was high and far away from the imperial capital. Although there were marine monsters invading the land, it was much better than the Hengduan mountain range, which was surrounded by monsters. At least the marine monsters did not have any deep hatred with the human race. When they invaded the land, it was purely to reduce the population of their race. However, the monster tides in the Hengduan mountain range were all filled with bone-deep hatred and would easily fight with their lives. In Green Peng King, other than having to pay tribute to the imperial court every year, it was no different from the current Lin Yuan. In Lei Qiuming's own territory, he was the supreme ruler. It was not even a problem for him to establish his own little imperial court. Chapter 475. Otherwise, Lei Qiuming wouldn't have been able to summon hundreds of thousands or even millions of regular soldiers. It wasn't that he didn't have the ability to rally supporters or connections. It was just that the treatment of a regular army and a temporary rebel army was completely different. It was clear that not every noble clan could raise a regular army that could contend with any army. Moreover, they had rebelled for the sake of profit, not for the sake of the throne. Now that Lei Qiuxing had sentenced Lei Qiuming to death, there would be no lack of internal struggle. But in the end, reason prevailed over emotion, allowing Zhang Xiu to breathe a sigh of relief. This lowly subject will take care of this matter. Zhang Xiu had also finished writing the edict. His expression was as calm as an ancient well. He said indifferently, "The Ether Society will be buried with him. It won't be a disgrace to this prince." By the time he finished speaking, Zhang Xiu had already handed the drafted edict to Lei Qiuxing. In order to show that this wasn't Lei Qiuxing's will, this edict was completely written in plain language. Only the person who received the edict knew the meaning behind it. Even if an outsider saw this edict, they wouldn't be able to attack Lei Qiuxing. At most they would only attack Zhang Xiu. However, moving Zhang Xiu to the embroidered uniform guard was just a small matter to them. But the revenge of the embroidered uniform guard and the Ether Society wasn't something that an ordinary person could endure. Moreover, this secret edict would not pass through the hands of a third person. Zhang Xiu would personally bring it out of the royal palace and hand it over to Li Zhongxing. Even the most daring person would not dare to oppose Zhang Xiu in the royal palace. After all, Zhang Xiu was in charge of the embroidered guard. Although his power in the royal palace was not as great as the shadows, who in the court did not have a few things that could be used against him that could cause their heads to fall into his hands. Go. Lei Qiuxing nodded slightly, but the ripples in his eyes showed that his heart wasn't calm. 4 hours later. Northern Frontier Prince's estate. Luo Su and Shi Dong sat on the left and right respectively. Lin Yuan sat on a cushion, quietly waiting. A moment later, 2 white pigeons flew into the hall and landed on their wrists. As the messenger pigeons used by the Council of the Fey Emperor and the embroidered uniform guard to send messages, they weren't the type that could be easily shot down and used as barbecue food. They were pure-blooded monsters through and through. Every pigeon that could cross the Wei River to send messages was at least at the initial stage of wisdom. If they encountered human cultivators, they would be able to fight. This was one of the support the Fei's royal court had given Lin Yuan to support. Luo Su took off the small bamboo tube tied to the carrier pigeon's leg and poured out the letter inside. Then, he glanced at the string of numbers on the paper, and a hint of joy flashed through his eyes. He said in a low voice, "The secret edict has been sent out from the imperial capital. That emperor who seems to be sitting calmly on the fishing boat, seems to have understood the consequences of not pacifying the south." Lin Yuan narrowed his eyes slightly and said in a deep voice, "Let the embroidered uniform guards hibernating in the Southern Expedition Army move. They must kill all the members of the embroidered uniform guards who have confirmed their identities as soon as possible. Even if they are suspected, they must be put under house arrest immediately. Send Mr. Gao to lead the Fallen Star Army to meet up with Li Zhongxing. Prepare to transport the spoils of war back to the northern frontier. Be careful." Although he knew that Lei Qiuxing was making a move to let him take advantage of the situation, Lin Yuan knew that Lei Qiuxing was someone who didn't like to be taken advantage of. Even if he knew that he had to take advantage of this situation, he had to find a way to disgust him. Fortunately, Zhang Xiu was a Heaven's Dipper realm cultivator. Although his speed wasn't slow, it would take him at least half a day to reach Li Zhongxing's tent from the imperial capital. Lin Yuan still had enough time to plan the operation and ensure that nothing would go wrong. Luo Su nodded slightly. He cupped his fists at Lin Yuan, then turned and walked out. Only then did Shi Dong slowly stand up and say, "There's news from the south. With Mr. Li Xan acting as the middleman, we've successfully contacted 8 evil cults. 5 of them are very interested in returning to the Jianghu continent. As long as the south is in chaos, they will immediately send people to the south. There's no need to wait. Send a reply to Qin Yu. Tell him to immediately create chaos in the coastal areas and lure those evil cults into the trap." A cold light flashed in Lin Yuan's heterochromatic eyes. He said in a low voice, "Lei Qiuxing wants to end this quickly. This king won't let him have his way. When the chaos in the south will end, it's not up to him. This king has the final say." "No." Li Zhong walked in and cupped his fists. "Lei Qiuxing wants to end this quickly. It must be because he has realized that if he wants to have a showdown with the Dragon King and not give up the country, the chaos in the south must end as soon as possible. If he can't see any hope, he will definitely find a way to suppress our northern frontier. What can he do to us?" Shi Dong frowned somewhat unhappily. He didn't care about his tone at all. During the rebellion of the 3 cities, because Lin Yuan was coincidentally not in the northern frontier, Li Zhong had to take charge of the situation. This northern frontier king violated the law and led his own palace guards from Shunning City to Taicang City to quell the rebellion. After returning to Shunning City, in order to show the authority of the new northern frontier law, Li Zhong didn't hesitate to put himself in a prison wagon and paraded himself through the streets of Shunning City for 3 days. He also announced that he would be imprisoned for half a year. During this half year, he couldn't step out of the palace in the northern frontier. If he violated this rule, he would be killed without mercy. Of course, this was because Li Zhong had his own reasons for doing so. In addition, many people in the northern frontier spontaneously came to offend this king who reduced their taxes and gave them land to cultivate. Therefore, Li Zhong was spared the death penalty. In his first announcement, he was going to commit suicide in the newly built central square of Shunning City. Of course, even if these people didn't spontaneously come to offend Li Zhong, there would still be other people who would do this. Although this kind of show couldn't fool the truly smart people, everyone knew that a new era had begun in the northern frontier. The change of 3 northern frontier kings proved that the monarchy was bestowed by God. Li Zhong violated the northern frontier law and punished himself, which proved that the king was under the law. From then on, there was only one voice left in the northern frontier, and that was the law of the northern frontier. As the author of the new northern frontier law, Lin Yuan could change the rules of the northern frontier law at any time, delete or add new rules. At this time, Black Jiao, who had been behind the scenes, became the ruler of the northern frontier, whether in fact or in name. During the 6 months of imprisonment, Li Zhong didn't call himself Gu. In other words, during this time he wasn't the king of the northern frontier, but a criminal. Therefore Sherdong didn't give Li Zhong any face. Chapter 476. What can they do to us? Li Zhong sneered and looked at Sherdong from the corner of his eyes. He said coldly, if our territory is only at the northern frontier, the Shenwu Empire can't do anything to us. But don't forget, we're going to take over the entire north. This means that our territory is starting to border with the Shuangjin dynasty. As long as Lei Qiusheng doesn't see any hope of victory, he will definitely choose to die together with us. Sherdong didn't respond to Li Zhong's words. Instead, his expression changed and cold sweat appeared on his forehead. As one of the 2 spies in the northern frontier, Sherdong was not only aware of the movements in the northern frontier, but he also knew the level of the opponents he was about to face. There was no need to mention the Shenwu emperor of the Shenwu dynasty. From the fact that the imperial guards had planted spies right under the nose of the emperor, it was enough to prove how much Lin Yuan valued Lei Qiusheng as an opponent. Of course, as their territory expanded, they would have to face more opponents than just Lei Qiusheng. The territory in the north was bordered by the barbarians of the Shuangjin dynasty. Now, whether it was the north or the northern frontier, both belonged to Lei Qiusheng. In order to save face, Lei Qiusheng had no choice but to maintain the situation of fighting on 2 fronts. However, once Lei Qiusheng decided to die together with them, he only needed to withdraw the army in the north. The northern frontier would then have to face the countless cavalry of the Shuangjin dynasty. In this way, most of the troops would be restrained. On the other hand, Lei Qiusheng only needed to guard a small part of the front line and could also transfer a large number of troops to support the south. As the spies in the shadows, Sherdong knew that the Shenwu dynasty would definitely not be so kind as to hand over the camps and fortifications they had painstakingly built to the northern frontier. Once the situation developed to that point, it would mean that the soldiers of the northern frontier would have to fight to the death with the barbarians of the Shuangjin dynasty in the wilderness. They would have to sacrifice some people to buy time and give up some land to build a new line of defense behind the original line of defense. However, that would require a lot of money, a lot of time, and a lot of sacrifices. Money, food, and sacrifices were not a problem for the current northern frontier. However, the time and manpower consumed would determine whether their side could have the last laugh in the crucial battle that was to come. Of course, while Lei Qiusheng was considering dying together with the enemy, he would not give up on his empire and reputation. As long as the northern frontier did not clash with the enemy, the front line in the north would continue to be maintained until both sides were prepared to fight to the death. If they allowed the barbarians of the Shuangjin dynasty to enter the north, it would bring even greater losses to the northern frontier. Therefore, this was a trump card and also the biggest problem the northern frontier had to face. The south will definitely be in chaos, but not for as long as it lasts. Li Zhong bowed to Lin Yuan again and said with a smile, "The chaos in the south has to be quelled before Lei Qiusheng loses his patience. At the very least, we have to let the south resume production and let Lei Qiusheng see hope that he can receive money and food into the warehouse after autumn. Therefore, we have to try to quell the north as soon as possible. The sooner we do so, the less pressure we have to face. By the time we're ready, those barbarians won't be so deadly." "What will teacher teach me?" Lin Yuan asked with great interest. With Li Zhong's personality, even though he knew he was putting on a show, a punishment was still a punishment. If it wasn't a matter of life and death, Li Zhong would never rashly come here to meet him. Therefore, when he realized the sinister intentions of the Shenwu dynasty, Li Zhong had been thinking about how to deal with it. He couldn't think of a solution, so he definitely wouldn't be able to see Li Zhong today. Otherwise, this proud scholar would at most send someone over to deliver a message. Fortify at every step and clear the field. The corners of Li Zhong's mouth curled up slightly. His expression suddenly became confident as he explained his plan. After all, the goal of the southern expedition wasn't just for territory. Li Zhongxing had also obtained Lei Qiuxing's secret edict, so their goal was already 80% complete. Next, they just had to wait to reap the benefits. After wiping out the aristocratic families and sects in the north, a large amount of money, food, and supplies would be sent directly to the northern frontier. The Shuangjian dynasty's love of plundering was their biggest weakness. If they didn't do anything, it would be equivalent to a wasted trip and they wouldn't get any benefits. Therefore, the barbarians would definitely continue to go deeper. By the time they passed Shanghai City, they would have entered the hinterland of the north. By then they would be exhausted. If they could launch a surprise attack on the barbarians at this time, they would definitely suffer heavy losses. However, the prerequisite was that Lin Yuan had successfully swept through the entire north and carried out the strategy of clearing the field with vertical walls. Otherwise, the barbarians would not continue to go deeper into the northern frontier. After all, Lin Yuan controlled the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce and had the support of a top force behind him. If it wasn't necessary, even the cruel and belligerent Shuangjian dynasty wouldn't think of wiping out Lin Yuan completely. This was because it would only cause the Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce, which had brought them endless wealth, to disappear. This would cause their overall national strength to be unable to keep up with the development of the other major dynasties. What these barbarians lack is not money or food. The reason why they raid the neighboring dynasties every year is because of their customs and habits. However, this group of wolves living in the grasslands also has the same fatal weakness as wolves. As long as they are hurt, they will run away with their tails between their legs. Before they recover from their injuries, they will definitely not have any ideas about the northern frontier. Li Zhongxing rubbed his forehead and continued, "After we defeat these barbarians, we'll use Donglin City as the center to build a ramp-like wall with cement. Then we can forever isolate the Shuangjian dynasty's barbarians from our territory. Unless, they can pass through the Xinwu dynasty's defense line and cross the Wei River to attack us." Yes, cement. With Lin Yuan's ability, it was impossible for him to make cement, which could be said to be a divine construction tool. However, after Lin Yuan learned the general formula of cement and investigated the entire Hengduan mountain range, he found many substitutes. With the help of the heroes of the northern frontier, he finally made cement, which could be said to be a treasure of good quality and cheap price. Otherwise, the Northern Frontier Academy in Shunning City would not have been built so quickly. Using cement to build a great wall to isolate the Shuangjian dynasty's barbarians from our territory? In Lin Yuan's opinion, this proposal was very promising. The Xinwu dynasty's heavy infantry was very powerful and could even fight head-on with demonic beasts. However, compared to the barbarian knights who came and went like the wind, they were definitely much easier to deal with. After all, even if they could not defeat Lin Yuan's army, it would not be a problem for them to find a way to escape. Chapter 477. Lin Yuan was in the north, but Xinwu dynasty was like that. There were not many places suitable for raising horses. Although they were close to the Frost Mirror grassland, they were much weaker than the Shuangjian dynasty. Therefore they could not get many war horses. The main body of the army was made up of infantrymen. Otherwise they would not be famous for being heavy infantrymen. After all, the Shuangjian barbarian could hardly break through their defense line. Even the Qingjiang crossbowmen, who were known as the best crossbowmen in the Seven Dynasties, could not break through. The northern frontier, which was also in the Xinwu dynasty's territory, was the same. The main body of the army was still made up of infantrymen. However, the heavy infantrymen trained by Lin Yuan were obviously not as good as those of the Xinwu dynasty. After all, they were well equipped. Besides, their generals had been honed on the battlefield with Lei Qiuxing. They could command these heavy infantrymen easily. It was not a problem for them to resist the charge of the Shuangjian barbarian. However, the northern frontier of today, it was estimated that the Blackwater army had to be called back from the south to fight the Shuangjian dynasty head-on. Of course, Li Zhong did not mean to look down on the army of the northern frontier. On the contrary, he had given the army of the northern frontier a very high evaluation. Excluding the reserves that Lei Fan brought from Xinlin Jun, the current northern battlefront army was made up of soldiers of varying quality. They could not do anything to the demonic beasts of the Wisdom State. In terms of fighting ability, they were not as good as those demon slayers who had been hunting in and out of the Hungduan Mountains all year round. However, the great enemy in front of the northern frontier was the elite army of the two dynasties. In addition to the extravagant Blackwater army built by Lin Yuan, only Gao Buzhan and the 5,000 old Fallen Star army soldiers could compete with these elite troops who had been famous for a long time. However, in a major battle with millions or tens of millions of people, the role of 5,000 people could play was minimal. They either served as the personal guards of the commander-in-chief to guard the headquarters, or were assigned to various subordinate sequences to supervise the soldiers and not retreat in battle. Other than that, there was almost no other use. If Lin Yuan did not plan and only considered his strength on paper, he could already wait for death at this moment. However, the northern frontier was improving all the time. The southern expedition was going through the baptism of war. After they got used to the battlefield and followed by cultivation and war training, they would be a qualified regular army. Even if they were not as good as the enemy, they would not be defeated before the enemy. Let's do it this way. Lin Yuan slowly opened his eyes and said calmly, "This is a dangerous move. If we fail, we will be doomed. While there is still time, those who are training the troops and those who are thinking about the details should leave." Yes. Li Zhong and Shi Dong cupped their hands and walked out one after another. Lin Yuan was still sitting cross-legged. A cold light flashed in his different-colored eyes. He said calmly, "Since you are here, why didn't you send the secret edict to Li Zhongxing first? Why did you come to this king's side?" Zhang Xiu's pale face appeared in the shadows as if he was drunk. He staggered out of the shadows with a faint smile on his face. He said mockingly, "If I didn't come here, how would I know that our opponent has studied us so thoroughly?" "Your opponent?" Lin Yuan suddenly laughed as if he had heard a joke. He said breathlessly, "You think too highly of yourself, don't you? Don't tell me you think that Lei Qiuxing still thinks you're fine?" Zhang Xiu's face changed slightly. Although it was only for a moment, but that moment of hesitation was still caught by Lin Yuan. When this king had just taken control of the northern frontier, there was still Lei Fan and Hu Yen who could keep me in check. The aristocratic families and sects in the northern frontier were still around. If they wanted to destroy this king, it would be as easy as flipping their hands. In addition, there was no Northern Territory Chamber of Commerce at that time. Even if the Hungduan mountain range wanted to protect me, they would have to give up the northern frontier. However, Lei Qiuxing suppressed his temper. This king could clearly feel his enmity. Therefore, even if you don't say it, this king can guess that Lei Qiuxing definitely wanted to destroy this king in the association of the Demon Emperor. However, at this time, someone whom Lei Qiuxing regarded as his think tank and trusted aide appeared. He suggested to Lei Qiuxing that this king should stay behind to observe the future. He even gave a series of suggestions that seemed like he was thinking of ways to keep the northern frontier in check. In fact, it was purely to let this king understand that Lei Qiuxing would not give up on destroying him. This allowed the northern frontier to grow stronger day after day and become a thorn in Lei Qiuxing's side. "Lord Zhang, are you trying to say that this matter has nothing to do with you?" Lin Yuan tilted his head. His strange eyes fell on Zhang Xiu as if he had seen through everything. "Even if this king believes you, do you think that Lei Qiuxing still hasn't realized it? Blame no retribution." Suddenly hearing a name that had not been called for many years, a bitter smile appeared on Zhang Xiu's pale face. He reached out to wipe his snot and said with a smile, "It seems like you are really popular. Although my royal uncle has already made up his mind, he is still very picky." "It is not easy for you to get him to reveal my identity to you." At this point, Zhang Xiu reached out to grab a chair and sat opposite Lin Yuan. He looked coldly at Lin Yuan and said coldly, "As a chess piece you should have the awareness of being a chess piece. Since I have chosen you, no matter how unwilling you are, you have to bite the bullet and move forward, even if you will be eaten in the next moment." "What? Because you are a person who is about to die? Or because of those clowns on the list?" Lin Yuan also looked coldly at Zhang Xiu. The coldness in his eyes was almost tangible. Zhang Xiu originally wanted to sneer twice, but when he heard Lin Yuan mention the name list, the expression on his face suddenly froze. "This king's ability is much greater than you think. Do you think you are still the high and mighty crown prince of the Myriad Swords dynasty who can behead countless people with a single sentence? Even if you were still the crown prince, the difference in status between us is still far greater than you can imagine, let alone the fact that you are just a pitiful slave of a fallen country. You, how dare you?" After Lin Yuan took off his mask, Zhang Xiu seemed to have lost his cool and returned to his original arrogant personality. After being provoked by Lin Yuan, he was so angry that he could not even speak. He could only point at Lin Yuan as his face flushed red. "Why did you come to the northern frontier?" "Oh, to deliver a secret decree." Lin Yuan looked mockingly at Zhang Xiu. A black scroll floated behind him. He smiled coldly and said, "What a coincidence. I also received a secret decree from Lei Qiusheng. Are you interested in taking a look?" Chapter 478. You can be considered quite capable. Back then, when over 100 princes of the Wanjian dynasty fought for the throne, you were the only one who had the last laugh. Unfortunately, before you could ascend the throne, Lei Qiusheng launched a coup and seized the throne that belonged to the Jiao clan. Thus, you changed your appearance and clothes, hiding in the Shenwu dynasty with the identity of Zhang Xiu. You actually obtained Lei Qiusheng's trust. At this point, Lin Yuan lightly shook his head and sneered, "Unfortunately, flowers do not bloom for 100 days. The longer you hid by Lei Qiusheng's side, the less he trusted you. And the change in attitude towards the northern frontier and Lei Qiusheng was the real reason why Lei Qiusheng wanted to kill you." Although Lin Yuan did not make any big moves during his hibernation period, he understood many things. The northern frontier was not the strongest enemy that Lei Qiusheng had encountered in his life, but it was definitely the one with the greatest potential. Regarding this hidden danger, not only did Zhang Xiu, who controlled every move of the northern frontier, not advise Lei Qiusheng to eliminate it while it was weak, he instead tried to persuade Lei Qiusheng. This gave the northern frontier time to grow. Now the northern frontier was too big to be eliminated. If Lei Qiusheng wanted to eliminate this thorn in his flesh, he would have to use the power of the entire country to fight Lin Yuan, and he might not even be able to obtain victory. This was because Zhang Xiu also saw the huge potential of the northern frontier, so he wanted to support the northern frontier to deal with Lei Qiusheng. After all, Lin Yuan was born as a demonic beast, so he was naturally weaker. If Lin Yuan could successfully usurp the country, he could raise his arm and call for the Jiao clan's remaining forces to unite and revive the Wanjian dynasty. Therefore, when the Ether Association infiltrated the northern frontier and tried to help the northern frontier take over Shunning City, it was not only to help Lin Yuan take over the northern frontier, but also to make the Demonic Emperor Association an existence similar to an evil cult in the human order, further weakening Lin Yuan's control and influence over the human forces under his command. However, they did not expect Lin Yuan to find out in advance. Not only did they fail to achieve their goal, but they also made Lin Yuan hate the Jiao clan's remaining forces. Therefore, Zhang Xiu was still one step behind. Although Lin Yuan ruled the northern frontier, in name, the northern frontier belonged to the northern frontier prince's mansion. When Lei Fan was still in office, he directly cut off the connection between the Jiao clan's remaining forces and the demonic beast king's mansion, and cleaned up the dark forces in the northern frontier. Now, even the embroidered uniform guards had to report to Lin Yuan if they wanted to enter the northern frontier, let alone the Jiao clan's remaining forces who were like rats. At this point, Zhang Xiu's plan could be said to have been completely aborted. However, the speed of the northern frontier's growth had far exceeded his imagination. If it were not for Lin Yuan's growing ambition, Lei Qiusheng would not have been able to make up his mind to fight the northern frontier. Instead, he would have officially accepted the northern frontier and let Lin Yuan and the aristocratic families, sects, and nobles slowly exhaust each other before swallowing them all together. After seeing through this and knowing Zhang Xiu's identity from Lei Qiusheng, Lin Yuan naturally had no scruples when facing Zhang Xiu. The relationship between the chess player and chess piece between the two sides had actually been reversed long ago. It was just that Zhang Xiu, who kept a low profile on the surface but still regarded himself as the legitimate royal family in his heart, was unwilling to admit this point. Zhang Xiu's expression suddenly changed. Although he knew that the fiend emperor of the northern frontier and the embroidered uniform guard were powerful, as the saying went, peers are enemies. As the leader of the embroidered uniform guard, although Zhang Xiu did not look down on his peers from the northern frontier, he did not view them as equals. However, Lin Yuan clearly knew about the conversation he had with Lei Qiusheng before leaving the imperial capital. As his thoughts raced, Zhang Xiu quickly locked onto the group of eunuchs guarding the heart-nurturing palace. However, he was not sure if there was only one or a group of eunuchs. They were all spies under Lin Yuan. Are you surprised? Lin Yuan's eyes narrowed slightly as he teased. As expected, you are not a wise man. You clearly know Lei Qiuxing's current attitude towards this king, but you still do not understand the crux of the matter. In the entire imperial court of the Shenwu dynasty, apart from Lei Qiuxing and you, who doesn't want to tear this king apart? Therefore, when the slightest changes in the imperial court spread to the northern frontier, this king will easily misunderstand Lei Qiuxing's intentions and lose his composure. Following this train of thought, think about how my spies were able to infiltrate Lei Qiuxing's side. It shouldn't be difficult, right? The spies around Lei Qiuxing were personally selected by Lei Qiuxing from the very beginning. Their purpose was to let Lin Yuan know Lei Qiuxing's words and actions so that he would not lose his composure because of the spontaneous actions of the civil and military officials of the Shenwu dynasty. This was because only Lei Qiuxing's own attitude could determine how long the peace of the northern frontier would last. Zhang Xiu's expression changed several times, but he forced himself to remain calm and said, "You want to deceive me with flowery words? Lin Yuan, don't forget, although I am not a spy, after decades of experience, I am much clearer than you about the intricacies of this matter. Others can maintain their composure when they are flustered, but you, Jiao Wuing, can't even do this and you still want to pretend to be calm?" Lin Yuan's tone became even more playful as he mocked. "Your attitude towards the northern frontier made Lei Qiuxing suspicious of you, and your attitude towards Lei Qiuxing was even more wrong. Do you think that a mighty ruler like Lei Qiuxing would not be able to see how big of a threat Lei Qiuxing is? He asked for your opinion just to test you. If you protected Lei Qiuxing like you protected the northern frontier, then he would still be dead but you would be able to survive. It's a pity that you hate the descendants of the Lei family too much, and actually tried to interfere with Lei Qiuxing's decision again. In addition, the Ether Association has been cooperating with the remnants of the Jiao family, and your attitude towards the remnants of the Jiao family seems to be cruel, but in reality, it only scratches the surface. Your identity is also on the verge of being exposed." After pausing for a moment, Lin Yuan then said with a smile, "Of course, your hands are stained with the blood of countless people of the same family. The crown prince of the Wanjian dynasty, who should have lived and died with the country, mysteriously disappeared the night before the imperial capital was breached. Compared to Jiao Xinghai, whose whereabouts are clear, it's as if you have evaporated from the face of the earth. Anyone with half a brain would be able to guess that you have concealed your identity, changed your appearance, and hibernated within the Shenwu dynasty." After Lin Yuan tore off the last bit of concealment, Zhang Xiu's face was cold as he said in a cold voice, "Bullshit dynasty, traitors who kill their masters and usurp the throne. Sooner or later, there will be a day when I will exterminate the entire Lei family. It's a pity that you won't have that chance." Another deep voice sounded. Zhang Xiu's eyelids twitched, subconsciously feeling that this voice was familiar. After a while, Zhang Xiu raised his head in shock. Looking at the calm and unruffled Lin Yuan, he angrily said, "You are King tricking me." As the head of the Secret Service, Zhang Xiu had naturally put in a lot of effort into the course of recognizing people. After all, he could not let others see through him. Therefore, Zhang Xiu quickly associated that deep voice with that terrifying expert who never left Lei Qiuxing's side. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.